This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
After 10. I had to check then. Good God, 20 years I've been doing this job. Which you watching it on YouTube. I went 4 minutes after. I swung to the right. 10 o'clock it is. Yeah, still same time I've been since some members of the production office upstairs weren't even born when I started announcing the time at 10 o'clock every morning, or shortly after 10 o'clock every morning. I've been trying to think of ways to make sense of it. You know, I don't want to talk about Don't Look Up again today as we turn our attention once again to the climate crisis, to mark the fact that COP29 is underway. If I'd asked you cold, if you hadn't heard anyone else talking about it, or you hadn't listened to the news or caught the news this morning, if I asked you to tell us what it was, like COP26, was that here? Was COP26 in the UK? So that has a... I don't know why COP26 is stuck in my mind, but if I asked you what this one is, would you have known? If it hadn't sort of, what would you have gone for? What would you have said? COP28? COP27? COP204? What COP would you have gone for? What would you have gone for? COP what? COP what? COP who? COP how? COP out? It's 29, lads. COP29 is. Do you know what COP stands for? Do you know what COP stands for? Do we know what COP even stands? Do you see what I mean? It is such a strange phenomenon in the news, the climate crisis. It is something that I think we must accept now. Idiots are never going to stop being idiots about. And they even have their own political wing of idiocy now. Donald Trump's White House is going to be full of idiots who just deny it violently. Deny reality, deny science. Physics doesn't care about your feelings. Should be a bumper sticker, shouldn't it? Should be a T-shirt slogan. Physics doesn't care about your feelings. But then you have the people who have become, radicalised has become such a dirty word, hasn't it? In the context of causes, in the context of direct action, I don't know what would be the best word to use. Radicalised carries with it the possibility that the person is wrong. And in the context of some terrorism, all terrorism, the likelihood, the certainty that the person is wrong. You become radicalised. It's often meant as an insult. It shouldn't be. I've been radicalised on things like the distribution of wealth, by which I mean I've gone from a position of ambivalence to a position of passion in the course of my life. But you've got the idiots, the kind of UKIP-y flavoured deniers. And again, there are Tufton Street organisations inevitably dedicated to promoting the interests of the fossil fuel industry while refusing to disclose who funds them. And then you've got the great ambivalence that sits in the middle. If I ever write another book, which is unlikely at the moment, although for some reason a couple of people have asked me this morning whether I'm going to. The Great Ambivalence is a good title, isn't it? The Great Ambivalence, or Why We Don't Care. Oh, I quite like it. Why don't we care about the things we should obviously care about? And then you've got the people who care. I don't know what we call them. Just Stop Oil, radicalised. Activists. Is that? I mean, you know, the people who are right and righteous and trying. The great ambivalence, that's really struck a chord with me this morning, because I've been trying to think of a way of making the political personal. I've been trying to find a way of imagining that, this is going to sound like I've been on the disco biscuits, but the body is a planet, or the planet is a body. In other words, that you are a planet. And if you think of it in those terms, I think I can make some sense of it, because, well, I guess it's generational as well. But you know, and I know, that we could probably be doing more to look after ourselves, right? We could probably be doing more to prolong our lives. And I don't mean having extra years on the end of what we'd currently have that are not of very high quality. I mean health. So smoking's not such a great example anymore, because so many people have knocked it on the head. But you knew when you smoked that you shouldn't. And you knew that it was likely to seriously curtail your health if not your life. You know, if you like a drink, you should probably drink less. And if you did, then you would improve both your health and you would probably lengthen your life. Exercise is probably the best example on that, particularly as you get older and you read slightly terrifying stories about why you need to stand on one foot while you're brushing your teeth, otherwise you're more likely to fall over when you get older. And you should be doing weight training, specific types of training relevant to your age in order to make sure that you are healthier as you get older. I was talking to my mum about this yesterday, actually, and she's well into her 80s now, but so is Mick Jagger. And, you know, Mick Jagger is still jumping around and dancing around on stage. And my mum, bless her, is not. So, you know, you sort of find, and she's led a good life. She's not led a life of particular excess or laziness. But Mick Jagger, we have to presume, has probably got some sort of genetic advantage, but has also dedicated a huge amount of time, despite, of course, having been something of a hellraiser over the years, to longevity, to doing the things. And he's got the might that lets him do it. So it's the knowledge that you should be doing something. So obviously you should be doing it. But you can't. You can't be... can I say that word on the radio? You can't... No, I better not. You can't be bothered. You can't be bothered. And if, like me, you sometimes struggle to understand how we, not others, because I'm guilty of this, how we can be ambivalent about the climate crisis. Remember, not an idiot, not someone who is swallowing the Kool-Aid being served up by the people protecting their fortunes. There's a logic to that. There's a logic to protecting your fortune, even if it's coming from selling oil or selling drugs or selling human beings. You know, all of those interests. Remember that when slavery was finally abolished, the reparations went to the slave owners, not to the enslaved people. So people will always be desperate to protect their interests if their interests are delivering extraordinary standards of living and untold riches. So why would oil be any different from human beings or tobacco or junk food and sugar and salt and the rest of it? But you make this decision yourself. You kind of just shrug. What could be more urgent than your own life? Then just think for a minute. I don't want to depress you, but think for a minute about your children and how they're going to feel when you pass away. I appreciate some people are going to be unblessed in this department, but I think for most of us, it's a fair presumption that our children are going to be at least quite sad when we finally shuffle off this mortal coil, right? You'd have to hope so. Frankly, I wouldn't wish unhappiness on anyone, but if you're going to actually pop your clogs, you'd expect your kids to be fairly unhappy about it, right? Think how you felt when you lost a beloved parent. Now, could that parent have done more to stick around for longer? Could that parent have behaved in a way that prolonged their life? Could you be doing more now? I don't know. I knew someone would say this. Peter says, where does Keith Richard fit into your analysis? I think I've absolutely no idea. Keith Richard, I think, there is only one Keith Richard. Could you currently be doing more? And I don't mean turning into that weird American bloke who's trying to turn himself into an 18-year-old and spending millions of dollars a year to do it, because he's not doing that I don't think he's doing that for reasons of family and love. It seems to be quite a narcissistic project. I'll get you his name, actually, because if you're not familiar with that story, it is extraordinary. It is extraordinary. But why aren't you doing more to prolong your life simply because you love your children so much? You love them so much. And they are going to be really sad when you're not here. Your grandchildren, if you're lucky enough to have them. They're going to be really sad when you're not here. And you would love to spend more time with them. You know? Why aren't you doing more? And I think, I could have gone completely bonkers, but I think that is the same mindset that many of us carry into the climate. It's just too much. We know that there is an apocalypse. We know some of the stuff. Listen to this. It's been a masterclass in human destruction, 2024. That's the United Nations Secretary General reflecting on extreme weather and record temperatures. Listen to this. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat. Floods tearing through You almost need to do the Blade Runner voice at this point, don't you? You need sort of Rutger Hauer to be doing it, or the bloke that used to do the cinema adverts. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat. Floods tearing through You need Patrick Stewart, I think, to do this. Floods tearing through communities and tearing down infrastructure. You need Brian Blummin' Blessed to do this as a voice. But it's not fiction, it's not a film. It's not an advertising campaign. It's the bloody news. It's the news this year. It's what's happened this year. Communities, children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops. All these disasters and more are being supercharged by human-made climate change. It just is. And the COP29 is in Baku in Azerbaijan, and the first thing the president of Azerbaijan did was stand up and describe his own oil reserves as a gift from God, telling Western countries or other countries to keep their beak out and let him do what he wants with it. He's the bloody host. We are absolutely screwed. We are screwed from here to eternity, literally, but not back again. Just listen to that sentence there. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat. Floods tearing through communities and tearing down infrastructure. Children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops. All these disasters and more are being supercharged by human-made climate change. And here's 30p Lee Anderson to tell you it's all a load of rubbish. We are absolutely... Do you know, there's about 2 or 3 days in the year when I really want to swear on the radio, because my vocabulary, although it's good, doesn't quite contain the words that carry the oomph that some swear words still carry, even in this age of profanity. We are absolutely, aren't we? So I've got 2 questions for you today. The first demands knowledge. The second demands thinking. The first is, what's going to happen? What is actually going to happen? We know what is happening, and it's not moving the needle enough. It's not moving the needle anywhere like enough. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat. Floods tearing through communities and tearing down infrastructure. Children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops. That is happening now. This year will raise the bar once again. Record burning of fossil fuels. No sign of the transition away from doing so, as the world is on track to set another new record for global carbon emissions. This is based on data that was released at the COP29 climate conference in Azerbaijan yesterday. Planet heating emissions from coal, oil and gas will rise by 0.8% in 2024. If emissions don't fall by 43% by 2030, 6 years hence, the world will have no chance of keeping to the 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature target and limiting increasingly dramatic climate impacts on people around the globe. What is going to happen? 0345 6060 973. I like people. Banjaxed is quite a good word, Martin. I nearly went for banjaxed. I quite like jiggered. That's come in from Matt in East Yorkshire. I have to be careful at this point. Fudged is quite a nice play as well, Gary. It's nice, isn't it? What a nice community we have on this programme. Although there will be some people trying to get me to say words I'm not familiar with that turn out to be absolutely outrageously profane and obscene. So I won't be playing that game. Earlier in the week, I asked you how you pronounce the word bulwark. Bulwark. The number of people who thought that I could be tempted into saying the word on live on the radio. I don't know whether that says a lot about you or a lot about what you think about me. There's no earthly way I'm going to fall for an invitation to say that word on the radio. The word that sounds a bit like bullock, but the correct pronunciation recognises the W. But none of them quite work, do they? None of them quite work. What did Terry Wogan used to say? Erica reminds. Yeah, he went for banjaxed. We are absolutely banjaxed. We just are. But then the weird thing kicks in. And the weird thing is a curious sense of relief and relaxation that you feel when you decide that you're not going to go to the gym, that you are going to have a smoke, that you are going to pour yourself a glass of wine, and you're going to stop worrying about dying or not being here for very long. And I wonder how big a part of the great ambivalence that might be. Do you know what I mean? I love my children. I love the bones of them. And the idea that there are things I could do today that would allow me to spend more time with them during my time upon this earth, it should have me, living on mung beans and joining a gym. But I won't. And I don't know why. But I think it's something very, very similar to how almost all of us feel about the planet. Not the idiots, all right, the rest of us. The great ambivalence. So what is actually going to happen, and will any of it be the wake-up call that you might have expected Valencia to be? 0345 6060 And this means you'll know. You might live in an area where your home is likely to fall off a cliff in the next 10 years. Or worse, What is actually going to happen? 0345 6060 And the second question, well, I'd like to ask what you think of my analysis, actually, what you think of my analogy. But I'm just going to ask whether you think that it's right, whether you, like me, with a horrible sense of guilt, but guilt that I can put away and feel that relief that you feel when you decide you're not going to worry about, I'm not going to join a gym, we're not going to do anything, are we? We're not going to rise to this challenge, which makes the answers to the first question close to urgent. What is going to happen? The point at which we'll all go, oh, do you know what, we should have done more, will be the point at which it's too late. I've read an extraordinary piece, but I'm doing mad introductions at the moment. I don't know why. It's almost as if I sort of get into the radio studio and just start thinking aloud, but I've got to start hitting my junctions at least close to the scheduled time. Otherwise, Keith will have an aneurysm. So I'm going to just bid you a brief farewell. I'll be back in a second. And we will start addressing these questions together. Because they're the most important questions that we will ever ask each other. And yet even now you're feeling a touch of the great ambivalence, aren't you? Just a little bit of, well, I know he's right, but I might stick some music. Oh, I know he's right, but, And if you can do it with your own children and your own life, you can do it with the planet.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:24. Chris says it's a lot like people with pre-type 2 diabetes that carry on looking for easy answers, and then suddenly it's full-on type 2. And you could lose a foot or a leg, but they carry on. Why? Because they know, after they know the end result. And these are probably the people that get most upset when governments try to limit sugar and encourage healthy options. It is just, so I'm trying. Obviously, as someone pointed out, you can control your own health, but you can't control anybody else's. But you're missing my point. I'm trying to draw an analogy between autonomy as an individual and autonomy as a population. So if a population moved as one, we could do this, but we won't. Why? I think of a population almost as an organism itself, and it is mostly ambivalent on this with the extremes. On one side, idiocy, like Carl, who's texted "drill baby drill" to the program, quoting Donald Trump. Straight into idiot's corner for Carl, although I doubt he'll notice. Or on the other side, the people who are dedicating their lives to trying to stop the world from its current path. Let's start with Marcus, who's in Islington. Marcus, what made you pick up the phone?
Morning, James.
Hello.
First-time caller.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. So yesterday I was watching Keir Starmer give his his point about the 81% reduction by 2035 in the UK. And I noticed that very quickly he then dovetailed that with a disclaimer saying, but we will not tell the public how to live their lives.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, hold on a second. If I leave my flat right now to get a coffee down the street, I can guarantee I will have seen 6 messages either on my phone or an advertising bill telling me exactly how I should live my life.
Yes.
And there will often be things that are telling me to live my life in a way that really isn't akin to reducing my carbon footprint or to, this idea of collective responsibility. It's all about the individual, So I guess my point is this. I do think there's a lack of leadership. And I think if we're taking this analogy this morning of the whole self, of us being a planet, of the planet being something we're all responsible for, I think then take that analogy further. I think the state should act as a parent. And I know that's deeply unpopular. And I know
it's deeply unpopular. There's so much chicken and egg on these kind of issues. It's deeply unpopular, partly because our media has been infested by the so-called think tanks that are in large part sponsored by tobacco companies and oil companies, and
I would,
on both sides of the Atlantic. So, on a clear playing field, would it be that unpopular? We're going to do something that will help you spend more time with your grandchildren.
The stakes are high. Roll the dice. See what happens, Prime Minister, if you actually do tell people how to live their lives over the next, it's only 10 years. That's two parliaments worth of telling people how to live their lives. I
know you're right, but that old line about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Donald Trump has just marched into the White House. And Starmer's defence might be, if I'm not in power, it will be a kind of UK pound shop Donald Trump type character, whether it's Badenoch or whoever it might be. Then there'll be even less done. So he has to be careful. He has to recognise the urgency of the mission and also recognise the media weight of nanny state nonsense of telling people. Do you see what I mean? It works. It works because you just described what you're describing as being unpopular. It works.
I'll also just really quickly in answer to your, why did I pick up the phone?
Yes.
I mean, I listen to you most mornings. There was something about the way that you talked about it this morning that struck a deep chord. And then putting the politics aside, I'm a parent of 2 kids. And I don't often think about their future in terms of them being my age. No. I mean, I probably should.
Yeah, but
as a parent, you're packing your kids to school each day, you're supporting them with their homework, etc., etc. And my heart sunk. Because when you start to think about how little time is left to turn this around and bring a level of sensibility and responsibility, and it's that awful despair moment where you think, as a parent, you automatically want to do the best for your children, but there's only so much. I really believe the individual can do a lot, but there is only so much we can do, and that's why I would want the state to tell me, bad luck, some things are going to have to go, because in the end we believe in the planet, and we believe in it being our home, and we believe in our children having a future. I have friends in Valencia just now, and in Spain, and I'm just thinking, God, I just wondered if that had been the UK. God forbid.
What we need, I don't know, we need to watch more closely what changes there, because the social anger, the social unrest directed at the authorities, up to and including the royal family, speaks of a conviction or a belief, a dawning belief that the people, quotes, in charge, end quotes, could have done more. And because they didn't, my house has washed away. And if the death toll in Valencia had been caused by a bomb, we'd probably still be talking about it on the news now. The Prime Minister of Spain, I think, has turned up in Baku, hasn't he? He has gone to COP, but quite a lot of other world leaders have not, which, of course, gives lots of ammunition to the idiots. But they may, even a stop clock is right twice a day. The idiots may have a point. If you're going to say, if it's such a big deal, why haven't the world leaders even turned up? And the answer might be what Marcus and I have just been dancing around, and what Keir Starmer is trying to dance around, which is not only do I have to get the message out there about how important it is, but now I have to cut my cloth according to the messages being put out by the idiots, by the deniers, by the net zero skeptics. I'll double check for you, but I think that Kemi Badenoch has nailed her colours to the wrong mast, as you'd expect on this already. And she, of course, will be doing PMQs later today. I've worked out what the phrase I was searching for last week to describe Kemi Badenoch at PMQs. I know exactly what she reminds me of. And I'll tell you after the very latest news headlines with Jenny Barsby.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. I'll tell you quickly because PMQs is coming around and I want it to have time to germinate in your mind. Kemi Badenoch is someone who thinks they're a superhero but hasn't actually got any superpowers. So imagine if like Spider-Man tried to shoot a web and no web came out of his hand, or Superman kind of threw his arms up into the air expecting to take off and didn't actually take off. But they keep thinking any minute now the superpowers are going to kick in, or that they somehow have kicked in but people haven't noticed. Now, I like this analogy. Eleanor's not impressed. This is outrageous. If you can come up with a better one, then send me your answers to Blue Sky. I am now on Blue Sky more than anywhere else. My name there is Mr. James O.B. And let's have a look at some of the things people are saying on Blue Sky, the new social media platform, or not new, but rapidly growing social media platform that many of us are seeing as a welcome alternative to the sewer that Elon Musk has allowed Twitter to become. Zoe makes a brilliant point. He doesn't have to tell us what to do. He just needs to tax the wrong things and incentivize the right things. I hope that's what he's going to do. So rather than a public health campaign, you just make things more expensive that are bad for you and less expensive that are good for you. And that is really what a decent politician would do. Has the US, Dara asked, just voted for Brexit? That may be a slightly different question. And this from Sandy. Climate change is like trying to understand the vastness of the universe, James. I just can't manage it. I can pick a star and in my daily life try to keep that star healthy by recycling. I don't have a car. I'm very careful about my food miles. I do as much as I can to help the planet. It's not enough, and that makes me sad. You are not the people I am talking about today. So you are not one of the people I'm talking about today because you feel sad. I'm talking about members of the great ambivalence and that weird sense of relief that we get when we allow ourselves to acknowledge that we're not going to do anything. That's the weirdest thing for me, but it's obviously part of the human condition. The next two calls are both from East Anglia, which may be relevant, it may not. We'll soon find out. First, Sam, who's in Norwich. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
So, thankfully, Norwich is not underwater yet.
No, but parts of East Anglia are and were. But anyway, that's why I mentioned it. Sorry, crack on.
Yeah. No. Well, actually, if anyone wants to take interest in that, look up Coathive. There's a big church in a place called Coathive, which I think it might be on the Suffolk coast. But it's this big ancient church. It's all in ruin. And slowly, it will get devoured by the sea. And they'll have to knock it down. And that's just upsetting at the end of the day. You look at this big building. Not the reason I called in.
Okay.
The thing that I wanted to talk about is actually one of your favourite analogies, and to literally answer what will happen. I think we're all frogs in the pan.
Yeah.
I think that one of the reasons that we're not noticing this is, follow the money. And to some point you go, well, people don't want to be inconvenienced. And I think the message gets broadcast as inconvenience to people. I walk to work and I see obviously tons of people all in their cars, all queuing up, taking up the big main road. And you think, well, one bus, you could fit 20 people on that, but people don't want the inconvenience because they want to drive right up to their office. Or you say to somebody, hey, well, maybe you could cut down on, the meat that you eat or things like that. And people say, but no, that's a lifestyle change.
Stop telling me what to do. You're not my mum. Stop telling me what to do. It's like petulant men children who dominate right-wing media, who just sort of hate being told what to do.
And that's it. And do you know what? I'm 30 now, so I'm sort of starting to now look for the future and look at house buying and look at kids and all those sort of like big life decisions. And I see myself as somebody who used to consume some of that kind of media, not like full-on indoctrinated, but I've zoomed out now and I've realised that, I'm not like that guy that's going to earn millions and things. It's not practical for me. And so I get it rationalised and I realise, well, actually, these decisions that I make, they're actually quite reasonable. And as I've started to shift the adjustments in my life, I realise they don't take too much. But because so much of the stuff we consume, people just shout it down at you and you get like this, it's a massive inconvenience and people are just stubborn. And I think it boils down, if I had to boil it down to one thing, I think it's because people don't like to have to critically think and they like to stay stubborn.
And I'm going to change people to we, if I may, just to insulate you and me from any condescension criticism, because we Some things we don't like to think about. I mean, there's a message here that says I'm ambivalent because it's nice here. I don't feel. Well, how would we feel if we lived in Valencia? I wonder if anyone in Valencia. I mean, it's a bit early to measure whether or not attitudes have changed forever. I remember I often refer to a very Republican mayor in America who appeared in Al Gore's film, and they simply explained the economic wisdom of adapting to climate change, of making changes, because otherwise the floods and the damage would cost a fortune. The head climate official at the United Nations has said that worsening climate impacts will put inflation on steroids. So all the Donald Trump fans who've ushered him into the White House because he's promising to bring down inflation are also ushering in policies guaranteed to increase it. There's a madness behind all of this, but you're right. If it doesn't admit intellectual analysis, if it does look and feel like a madness, it's because emotions are overcoming intellect, isn't it? It's about feelings, and the feelings are being fed by the messages you describe.
Yeah, and if I might just jump in one last thing, it's just, I think ultimately, like I say, follow the money with these things. We're all so desperate to just make ends meet and get to work and do all that sort of thing that you sort of swallow what you don't realise is inconvenience. Like I talk about, I walk to work and people drive, and that's all just kind of by the by. But like, people are so desperate. I've just got to get to work. I've just got to do this, and they swallow like the everyday convenience without actually realising.
So do you.
Well,
all right. Would you like £1 million?
Of course.
Okay. Would you like £1 billion?
Sounds better.
Okay. What I want in return is your soul. So for all of your time on this earth, you can be the richest man. You can be Elon Musk if you want. But when you die, I get your soul for all of eternity. I knew I was thinking about something else, not just the parallels with personal health. But there's a reason why Faustus is one of those great stories through the ages, isn't it? Isn't there? Dr. Faust, when Satan offers you a deal with the devil in return for your soul, you become the best blues guitarist of all time, or you become the richest man on earth, or and that's the deal you do, because you think, well, that's great, I'm going to be the richest man on earth. And then the clock ticks, and as the doomsday approaches, you realise that you've made a terrible, terrible deal.
Yeah,
I don't price, think you
can sum up any better.
It's like a Faustian pact. Now, if you're getting the money, I understand that. If you're getting the untold riches, I understand the Faustian pact. If you're a fossil fuel company, there's an absolutely ineluctable logic to what they're doing. Would you mind turning off that tap there that pumps money into your bank account at a rate of knots every single day? Well, no, why would I want to turn that off? Because it's good for everyone else. I don't care. It's good for your children and your grandchildren. I don't care. I like money. I like my children and my grandchildren, but I don't believe I can persuade myself that you're wrong. I don't believe you. Give me the money. Would you like to sell your soul in return for infinite riches, for the duration of your life on this? I'll tell you what, I'll make the deal even better. I'll guarantee you 50 more years on earth. You can live to the age of 102, right? As the richest man on the planet. All your dreams can come true. I'll give you the ability to seduce whoever you want to seduce, to make you whatever you think will make you happy. It's yours. But in return, I get to burn your soul in hell for all of eternity. Why do you think that story is one of the stories that resonates throughout the generations, that humans tell to humans and have told to humans for years? Because it speaks to a fundamental truth. And it's the fundamental truth we're discussing today. Kevin is in Kings Lynn, which is a little bit closer to the action when it comes to climate change. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Oh, just a little bit closer, James. I live beside the tidal river, Great Ouse, and we see the tide coming in twice a day, every day with a tidal ball on it, and we see how high the rivers are getting. But that's another story. James, I'm disappointed with you this morning, sir. I've been out to a survey this morning, come back to the office, tuned into you, and you're putting a big black cloud over everyone with more climate anxiety. You need to be talking about the good things about what's happening.
No, I don't. I disagree. Families running for their... Well, I'll do what the head of the UN said, and then you come back with the good stuff, all right?
Okay.
Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes, workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat, floods tearing through communities and tearing down infrastructure, children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops, all these disasters and more being supercharged by human-made climate change, and the icing, or the cherry on the icing on the cake, Emissions must fall by 43% by 2030 for the world to have any chance at all of keeping to the 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature target. And this year, they're actually going to be, not for the first time, obviously, the highest that they've ever been. Over to you.
Well, first of all, he's wrong about 2030 being when we hit 1.5, because we've already hit it. We're too late, okay? So we've got to accept that.
Hang on, you're supposed to be doing the good stuff.
Yeah, I will, but I'm just correcting you on that one thing first.
You're not correcting me. This is the UN's COP29 data.
Antonio Gilliard. Yeah, I get that. Okay. Listen, what I phoned up was, originally, there's a tweet or an X was posted last night, which really resonated with me. I don't know if you're aware, or the people at home listening are aware, it took 68 years for the world, not just this country or China or America, the world, to reach 1 terawatt of solar PV capacity. James, it took 2 years to double it. It took 2 years to double it. That's the speed of the transition right now.
Yes, but you work in the sector, don't you? I remember now.
Of course I do.
No, well, that's fine, and that's great. But, this isn't a morning for you to come on LBC and help yourself to a free advert. It's not touching the sides, Kevin. It's not touching. It's not touched. So great, yeah. Lots of people are adapting solar. Solar could be the answer.
It's not just solar, James.
No, but I know all of this is true, but we're not doing enough. And to pretend that we are is dangerous and foolish and wrong.
No, but the most important thing is the conversations. But we can start the conversations a different way. So for me, okay, one of the ways that I work, and we won't mention the name of the company or anything, but one of the ways that I work is quite simple. We could do 1 day a month community engagement. So January, I'm booked up to speak to 200 kids at a series of academies where we educate. I
salute you for what you're doing, but this has been going on for 20 or 30 years, and the decision makers have gone in the opposite directions. World leaders haven't turned up in Baku for COP29, who did turn up for COP26 and COP25. It's not even the case that we've reached some sort of stalemate. It's possibly the case that we've hit some sort of reverse. Well, we have. In America, they are going into reverse on this stuff, regardless of how many kids you... And this will sound very patronising. I don't mean... Well, I'll change my language, actually, so that I don't. It doesn't matter the brilliant work that you do. It doesn't matter how many school children in Norfolk you talk to this week. If you've got someone in the White House who is shouting "drill, baby, drill" at the top of his voice, and half the population is cheering like lemmings, then I'm afraid it is not a morning for focusing on the good stuff. I wish it was, mate. You know I do.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. It's a funny one. And listen, there's no judgment involved in this, because I think part of the reason why Keir Starmer's talking about not telling people what to do is none of us like being judged. We don't even really like judging ourselves. So you make it personal rather than political, and you say, well, there are lots of things I could do to improve the state of this body, this vessel. Lots of things I could do. And if I did, everything improves. I spend more time with the people that I love. I feel less pain. All of these things. And yet, no one does everything they could do. And most of us don't do anything like as much as we could do. And somehow, if you think of the population of the planet as an organism, that's what's happening with regard to climate change. I haven't really even gone yet, and it's 10:48 already, to the question of what is going to happen. If you look at the scenes from Valencia and then look at elements of the British media where absolutely nothing changed, as we predicted, you wonder what it might take to give some heads a wobble. Adrian's in Perth. Adrian, what would you like to say?
First of all, James, thanks so much for having me on. But what I want to say to you is thank you. You're doing such a great job, and your work is really, really important. And I do believe, I sense that we're quite close to a social tipping point, because I think people are increasingly aware. But you're absolutely right. The government really needs to engage us and tell us how serious it is. That's got to be the first thing.
Do you not think they've tried? I mean, and of course, what you get, and this is a mark of our age, but also, I think, of humanity. If a politician stands up and tells the truth and we don't like it, the line of politicians prepared to stand up and tell lies that people will find considerably more palatable will stretch from here to Azerbaijan, won't it?
But I think the time is right. I really do.
Wow.
And there's something that people can. There's a practical thing that people can do. There's a petition to the government for that. We're asking them to debate whether or not to be open and honest with the British public. And if people... I really do think that we're ready for it. We're seeing what's happened in Valencia. You're asking, what does it take? If you look at what happened in Valencia, that was effective at people realizing that they were furious with their leaders because they were not protecting them. Now, will it take that here? I'm not sure. I think we're close to that tipping point, and that is a practical thing that people can do. Find the petition. It's with the UK government. It's up to around about 10,000 now, and if it gets to 100,000, then it will have to be debated. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, we don't have to feel helpless. If we feel that we're just one person trying to make a difference in our own life, then it does feel a little bit helpless. Join with others. That's my call to people. Join with others. Find out what other groups are doing. Take action. There are so many things that we can actually do. Join an organisation. It's not too late.
Is there can we think of a precedent?
One person change the world. Stop being one person.
I salute your optimism. I really do, and I can share it on a good day. Is there a precedent in human history? Do you think?
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. 1930s UK. We've done it before. When somebody gets up, you talked about when somebody.
Do you
gets
mean
up
Nazism?
And they have the. No, I'm talking about in the UK, our response to what was happening in Europe. So when Churchill gets up and says, we're on this runaway train, that fantastic speech, great act of leadership. He took a risk, and people then got it. They got behind him, and it was a wartime footing, and it was an emergency situation. And people understood the need to do it, and they welcomed and embraced things like rationing. And so much so that at the end of the war, they voted Churchill out when he tried to end rationing because people could see that it was fair and that it was necessary. And that's what we need. We need people to understand how necessary this is.
If only we could sort of put the climate change in jackboots and swastikas and turn it into a more easily processed peril, a danger, enemy, something that needs to be fought as opposed to something that needs to be accommodated, or I don't know that I come all the way with you on that analogy, but it's an interesting one. I was thinking more of threats and dangers that haven't got a uniform on, that haven't got a name almost. I know climate change is a name, climate change crisis, but that's human versus human. That's humans stopping other humans from doing things, and this is a slightly different proposition, but it goes some of the way towards answering my question. Thank you, Adrian. 10:52 is the time. Talked about it more now. I've said to you before, in fact, the analogy extends, of course, to this programme, where by some laws of logic, we talk about little else. We talk about this at least every day, possibly for 3 hours, because nothing is more important. But imagine if I did that. I'd be off air by Christmas. I'd be hitting GB News kind of figures by the end of next week. I mean, there'd be literally nobody listening. It'd be extraordinary. But there it is. Jeff is in Reigate. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Yes. Hello, James.
Hello, Jeff.
I've been down the gym, then had a cigarette, and now I've had a coffee. So I'm feeling really angry and feisty. I've been listening to.
You're hedging your bets this morning, Jeff.
I balanced it. But I took part in a workshop about 3 weeks ago, run by Climate Fresh, they're a French company, and I really wanted to find out more about the cause and effect. And it was a really interesting workshop because I had sets of cards that they start off with human activity and work down, if you like, or walk up the disaster tree from, burning fossil fuels, of course, deforestation, agriculture, transportation, and then all the way through, I won't go over everything, to the end result, which is cyclones, droughts, flooding, disease, access to fresh water, wars, fires. I mean, apocalyptic, in its essence. And you said, what is the problem? At the end of this workshop, people were saying, what can we do to action? And people were saying, well, I'm going to eat less meat.
Yeah.
I'm going to do more recycling. And I was saying, no, we need to call out the politicians. We need to call out the lobbying, the donations, the media, the misinformation, and bring these problems right back to human activity, which is the burning of fossil fuels. And the fact is that the politicians, the media, the disinformation is just making and the rich get richer. But also the idea of like World War I posters, what did you do in the Great War, Grandad? And it's almost a case of maybe it's the children to call out these billionaires. What is the legacy? How much money do you need? There needs to be a movement of change, a mobilization. Actually, I was on your show talking about Extinction Rebellion. You kicked me off about 4 years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I mentioned the C word, which was China, of course, because I was talking in the concept of unsustainable consumerism, having worked in marketing most of my career, and the idea that my dad and my mum, which was you buy well, you make do, you mend, and stop buying so much rubbish that you don't need, which is, of course, fuels the profit.
I mean, I was talking about this at home last night. We need some new garage doors, and it's going to be cheaper to get new ones than it is to get the old ones repaired.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and everyone's got examples of that. When there used to be a little shop on the Horse Fair in Kidderminster, Jeff. I don't know if you're familiar with that particular corner of these islands. There was a little shop on the Horse Fair in Kidderminster, and there was one on Cumberton Hill near where my mum had her dress shop. You could take your vacuum cleaner in to get it fixed.
Yeah.
He'd do anything. You'd have a crack at your fridge if you asked him nicely.
I know. Yeah. Well, the irony is, I'm now finding charity shops are quite expensive.
No, it is. Yeah, the priorities have shifted because I guess there's no profit. The profits in repairing or the profits in recycling aren't big enough. I'm sure I didn't chuck you off, Jeff. I think that's a touch of the victimhood coming out there. I'm sure I moved on because time was against us or something. Right?
No, it really was. And actually, I was going to come and say hello at the Spectrum film premiere because my background's games. And
how heavily embedded in that world were you?
Very, actually.
You're not him, are you?
Who?
Well, there's one very famous Jeff from the world of Spectrums.
No, that's not me.
No, you're not the llama. You're not the llama soft, Jeff.
No, right. no.
Well, you should have come. You should have come and said hello. It was a lovely evening. I'll tell you what wasn't lovely, Jeff. Seeing yourself on the biggest cinema screen in Europe when you hadn't really, as ever with me, I hadn't really, I'd never put bloody makeup on even when I'm in a studio and my posture's appalling. That was an unnerving moment to see myself slumped in a chair on the biggest cinema screen in the whole of Europe. I won't be doing that again in a hurry. But next time, come and say hello. And also, tell me off if I did indeed cut you off 4 years ago. Not that you're bearing a grudge. Last word on this to Jack, who's in Swaffham Bullbeck, which I haven't heard of, but sounds, again, very East Anglian. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm an environmental science student doing my A-levels currently.
Gosh.
I'm in my second year, so I'm literally learning about this topic right now.
Yes.
And we've been doing about things called tipping points, which are natural kind of points that we get to where the different natural cycles and stuff kind of can't be reversed.
Yeah.
And so, like, for example, when it comes to things like flooding and extreme weather and stuff, we can kind of mitigate those with different flood protection measures, switching to renewables to reduce carbon emissions and stuff. But we kind of get to a certain point where no matter what we do, it makes no difference.
Yeah.
So that's quite worrying, and that actually a lot of my classmates and stuff have really kind of taken that to heart and gone, hold on, this is a lot bigger than we thought, because once we get to that point, no matter
how close to it, I mean,
technology-
earlier caller, Kevin in King's Lynn, suggested that we might already have passed it. COP this week is saying that for some of it, for temperature targets, 2030 is probably the last chance, and we're not looking like we're going to get close to it. Which ones are you most concerned about, or which ones get the biggest collective intake of breath in class?
When it comes to 2030 would be pretty accurate. We've got about 10 years max to sort it. Especially when you look at stuff up in, for example, like in Antarctica and stuff, the fact that one impact to, say, rising temperatures, which we've already exceeded, can have ridiculously huge impacts. So, for example, it melts the ice, causes sea level rise, reduces the reflectivity of the ice, which then increases temperatures further. That then also releases methane from permafrost, which also melts, and the whole cycle repeats. So that was the biggest thing that kind of really shocked us, was the fact that if we don't actually address the temperature rise, which at the moment is the biggest long-term impact.
Do your generation feel baffled at the inactivity of my generation?
Yeah, mainly because, especially with the way things have been under Tory leadership for the last 14 years, it's made young people feel quite powerless.
Yeah.
Especially when you see your parents and stuff feel really powerless. makes you feel even more powerless.
Yeah.
As if there's nothing we can do.
And then it becomes almost an act of self-preservation mentally to turn off. I mean, I hope your generation doesn't, but when I talked about the great ambivalence, if the psychic toll of thinking about it and focusing on it is so great, you can understand. I feel a bit like this with regard to Donald Trump at the moment. I'm just going to give myself a few weeks off from thinking about it. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do, yeah. And it's one of those things that, because I'm studying about it, I can't not think about it. And a lot of people my age can't not think about it. But I can understand where working people really can't focus on that because they're so busy and so kind of...
Yeah, that's gracious of you. But I mean, there comes a point, and I guess that is a tipping point, but both literally and academically, there comes a point where none of those excuses will matter because the damage that has been done it becomes irreversible. Jack, thank you, mate, and good luck with your A-levels. Is it Bulbeck, Swaffham Bulbeck? Where is that?
Swaffham Bulbeck. That is a really small village on the edge of the Cambridgeshire Fens.
Oh, how delightful. So you're in the middle. I mean, there's centuries of research material for you there then on when it comes to flood management and dealing with the climate and also harnessing it. But of course, not against the backdrop of epic fossil fuel emissions. It's 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. I should have asked Jack what he plans to do next, shouldn't I? Because the headline that caught my eye most this morning after the climate stuff, and of course the reports of Justin Welby's resignation, which happened shortly after we came off air yesterday. I'll tell you what, that means that Gary Lineker and Justin Welby both went on the same day, which means that Carol Vorderman and me are very, very worried about our futures. You're going to assemble the tiny number of people that were lucky enough to have a platform and speak out against some of the worst excesses of the last few years, notably, I suppose, the Rwanda debacle. Then Justin Welby and Gary Lineker reaching the end of their rainbows, albeit in very, very different ways. And for Gary, I think very much on his own terms, thank goodness, one of the great heroes of mine, Gary Lineker, and I use that word. I do not use that word lightly, but it does rather highlight how few, this horrible echo chamber that is the British media, full of lefties, putting forward. You ask people to name 5 who've got big media platforms, or have got jobs where they get paid for their opinions. Because Gary, of course, Lineker offers up his views for free. He doesn't get paid for his opinions about climate change or immigration or Brexit. He gets paid for his opinions about football. The list is quite incredibly short, but you wouldn't know it to listen to some of the nonsense that is out there. Well, I'll tell you what headline caught my eye after I play this game. This isn't a headline round. This is a first paragraph. What's the missing word? This story tickled me pink. Actually made me bark. No, you say LOL, laugh out loud. Because it's true, isn't it? Sometimes you do, but not as often as you use the phrase LOL. You very often say lol when you haven't laughed out loud at all. Someone sends you something mildly amusing. And I don't really use lol because I'm 52. I'm nearly 53. Lol. But people I love of roughly my own age use it. They'll send me something and they reply lol. I send them something, they reply lol. But I know they haven't laughed out loud. Of course but I did actually laugh out loud at this when I read the word that I'm going to play a game with you now. Yes, David Cameron used it the wrong way around. He thought it meant lots of love, I think, when he was communing privately with Rupert Murdoch's representative on Earth. I did actually do a kind of bark. Does that count as a lol? Where you sort of go, ha ha, like that, like a laugh. Is that a lol? Is that a lol? It is a lol. It was out loud and it was a laugh of sort. Anyway, shall I read you the paragraph that made me lol? This one, and I'm not going to tell you what the missing word was. A champion strongman who claimed a car crash had left him too weak to hold shopping bags has been filmed lifting a blank. Lifting a... I told you it was funny. Lifting a what? So there's some stuff that's obvious. So this is where comedy becomes quite interesting, doesn't it? Like alchemy. So you need to put something in that space that obviously makes a mockery of the idea that he couldn't lift shopping bags, but is also very funny. So, what would be funny? So he'd been filmed lifting, I don't know, concrete balls. That's not that funny, unless you're really childish and you find the word balls amusing. All right, Keith. Or lifting, I don't know, shopping bags would be probably the most obvious thing that would be embarrassing for him to be filmed lifting. But what would actually make you laugh? Because it made me laugh a lot, and it is on. Well, that's the challenge for you now. I'll give you. I'm going to try and use pause today. It was not. Someone's come close already. It wasn't a pig, Chris. No. It wasn't a shopping trolley or a parasol. Who said a parasol? Why would it be a parasol? And no, it wasn't cauliflower or a horse from William. A horse would be funny, wouldn't it? That's a really good example of why some things are funny and other things are not. So a champion strongman who claimed a car crash had left him too weak to hold shopping bags has been filmed lifting a horse. That would be funny. But it's not a horse. It's not a keg of beer either, which is a reference. I love strongman. My mate Danny Wallace does the voiceovers on strongman competitions. And I think that's one of the coolest jobs in broadcasting. The jobs I always fancy in broadcasting are not the jobs that other people get excited about. But if Danny ever wants to hang up his headphones on commentating on the world's strongest man, I am here. I am ready. I am messing around when I should be telling you about the topic we're going to talk about next. How many young people do you think are currently not in work or education or training and not trying to find work? I've done this conversation, or I've tried to have this conversation with you on a few occasions. It always goes well. It's always a busy switchboard, and with lots of interesting things being said by lots of interesting people. But I've never got to the heart of it. So I'm going to try and do it slightly differently today. I want to talk to you if you are one of the 1.2 million young people who are out of work, but crucially, one of the 790,000 people aged 16 to 24 who are not trying to find any. So you're not studying, you're not in work, and you're not looking for a job. I want you to call me and talk to me if you are in that category or if someone in that category is in your house. Because here is what I think is happening, right? And I think a hell of a lot of it is going to be post-pandemic and associated with mental health, but not quite as completely as perhaps most commentators and even perhaps medics would attest. So I'm going to get distracted now by people suggesting that he was lifting a Tesco manager. Yeah, that would have been because of shopping bags. So he's been signed off work because he says he can't lift shopping bags. He's been filmed lifting a Tesco manager. A forklift truck, a slippery carp fish. Is he trying to lift the nation out of its deep, desperate, dark despair? No, Mike, that's my job at 10 o'clock every morning. Has he been lifting shop assistants? Is it a fridge? Was he caught lifting a pint? And Des in Sheffield suggests he's been lifting half a stone of whelks. I don't know that's funny. I mean, anyway, I'm not a comedian, as you've probably gathered over the years that we've spent together. But I am curious. And I think this is about people who have good days and bad days. Are you going to correct me if I'm wrong? Are you going to tell me if I'm right? So you take 789,000 16 to 24-year-olds. There's another 422,000 who are unemployed and looking for work. Perhaps is a slightly different conversation because it's almost double that number who aren't in work, they're not studying, and they are not looking for work. Now, my theory would be that there, of course, will always be a few who are just swinging the lead, taking it easy, and somehow they are able to do so, probably because mum and dad are subsidising them rather than because they're signing on or relying on the state. But I acknowledge their existence, and I repudiate entirely the idea that they are the beginning and the end of these statistics and these stories. And I think one of the great tragedies of the post-pandemic period is the pushing into the background of the people who are still suffering the consequences. It could be physical health, it could be mental health, but I'm talking about people, I think I'm talking about people who have good days and bad days. Now, you and I, from our lofty eyrie of middle age, if indeed you are middle-aged, we might not get this. We might think that these young people just need to have they need to be a bit more scared. They need to feel the sort of heat of poverty breathing down their neck so that they get off their backsides out the front door and go to work. Or in the case of some, if it's 16 to 24-year-olds, go to college or go to school. And they tell you that they can't. They tell you that they can't. And it's, unless they're, covered in pustules or shivering with fever, when they tell you that they can't because they're too tired or they're too anxious or they're too scared, I think for most of my generation, and quite possibly yours, one of the early reactions and obvious reactions to this is a degree of skepticism. And the reason I don't like that reaction is because it's so unlikely. When I first started doing this job, I was slightly taken aback by not just the cruelty and the callousness with which people would talk about the unemployed, but also the relish that people would talk about them. The nonsense that would be spoken about people who had... It was as if the rhetoric was designed from a perspective of envy. So the only way you can turn people against the unemployed is by pretending that they have a better life than the employed, which is where the rhetoric of flat screen televisions and all the rest of it. I swear, you probably find it hard to believe. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and for the first 5 or 10 years of that, it was almost a daily occurrence. Put the boot into the unemployed, certainly under Labour. Putting the boot into the unemployed. They get it too easy. They've all got flat screen television. It was like a sort of... like a chorus to a song. Flat screen televisions, flat screen televisions, flat screen television. Even long after it became impossible to buy a television in this country that wasn't flat screen, the usual suspects would still be banging on about flat screen televisions. And I didn't get it. It took me quite a long time to get it. And what I didn't get was that in order to make sure that these people don't get the help they deserve, you need to create a political narrative that they don't deserve help. So it's the same people that think we can fix the NHS without having any tax increases or farmers paying inheritance tax. It's always the same engines of influence in the media and in politics. If you want to cut taxes for the rich, you have to pretend that unemployed people don't deserve help or don't need help, or even that poor people... Remember the thing, the lodestar of all of this is the number of people on universal credit who've got full-time jobs, which means that the government is actually helping to pay the wages of people working for companies that make hundreds of millions of pounds in profits. And when I say the government, I mean you and me. The governments keep the profit. The companies keep the profits. The Treasury tops up the wages for people in full-time jobs on universal credit or part-time. So there's a lot of different answers to this question, and I'd quite like to get to all of them, because I think 3 things are going on. The first is, if you have good days and bad days, you can't commit to a proper job. You can't commit to a normal job. And the current system does not accommodate your health. And that's why I mentioned the skepticism and the pull your socks up and go outside or whatever it may be. But that is... If that's you or someone in your home, give me a ring and tell me about that. I can't. I'd love to get a job, but I can't, because I can be absolutely fine on a Monday, but I can wake up on a Wednesday feeling either bleak or absolutely shattered. And I get shaky on my way down the stairs. I think that is a lot more widespread than we realise, partly because the medical establishment doesn't quite know what to do about it or what's going on. Just a theory. Tell me whether it resonates with you. 0345 6060 973. The second one might be more interesting. People have found a third way. So you're not in full-time employment, you're not in education or training, but you're doing something else. So you'll be part of this statistic, but you're actually doing something at home that is a job while not a job. Do you see what I mean? The kind of... one of my nephews was doing at one point, is buying stuff and then reselling. I don't know how widespread that is, but again, I think it might be slightly bigger than some of the coverage allows, because we all come at it from the 1990s or the early noughties. We all come at this. There's only one way, mode of employment. You get an employer, he pays you a wage, you go to work. Post-pandemic, things are changing. We spoke a lot yesterday about working from home. And then And then the third one, I guess, is the people who want to do it but can't. So you're trying to find work, but you can't find it. I don't know what that would be like, given that we hear so much about OnlyFans would be an example, David. I should have to get someone to explain to me exactly what that is shortly. But not on air. It was a joke. Don't ring me about that. David, stop sending me dirty jokes. But the income streams that are not traditional, if you're doing that, what are you doing? 0345 6060973. Personally, I'm most interested in the health side of it. Socially, I'm most interested in it in the new income streams, the things that don't actually count as jobs in the traditional sense, but are a living, provide an income. And I suppose statistically, I'm most interested in how there can be 422,000 unemployed young people looking for work, a figure that has doubled in 2 years, when the number of vacancies has risen exponentially in all sorts of sectors where entry-level work would be, I think, quite straightforward to secure. Phone lines are open, 0345 6060973. I'll leave you with this. A champion strongman who claimed a car crash had left him too weak to hold shopping bags has been filmed lifting a what?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 21 minutes after 11. Right, pay attention, okay? This is a conversation about 16 to 24-year-olds. Am I sounding suitably stentorian? That's a nice little alliteration. Am I sounding suitably stentorian? 16 to 24-year-olds. Stop ringing in if you are not in that category, all right? Because some people are getting very cross about it. 16 to 24-year-olds. If you're not in that, if you are in that category and you've rung in and encountered somebody who sounds very cross, welcome to my world. So I don't want to hear from you if you are aged 54, or if you're talking about somebody who, don't ring me and tell me about somebody else who is not aged 16 to 24, all right? That's what the conversation is about. Thank you. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. So, to recap, number one, you're aged 16 to 24 and you can't work because you can't guarantee your health will be consistent. Even though I could catch you on a good day, you have bad day. I think that, for me, I would put my money on that being the biggest reason. Reason number two is that you are actually earning a living, and I don't want to necessarily get you into any trouble with the tax man, but it doesn't fit into any traditional categories on the kind of survey that we're looking at here. So you are earning a living, but you haven't got a job. I don't know quite how that would work, but I think it's probably a thing. And I think it's probably the second biggest category in the 869,000 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in education or employment and not looking for a job. Not looking for a job. Why aren't you looking for a job? Why is the person you love not looking for a job? And then, if there's time, we'll get on to point three, which will include 25-year-old. No, I'm joking. Point three might be why there are so many people, although nowhere near as many, who in that age group, 16 to 24, who are looking for jobs, but aren't finding any. Let's start with Ben, who is in Brockenhurst. Lovely part of the word. Ben, what would you like to say? What can you tell me?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I just wanted to sort of go back and address the excellent phrase you coined earlier of the great ambivalence. And I think within the younger generation, it's so much easier to hide behind this factor because of aspects like social media and media,
but you've still got
in general.
So, but people that you're talking about live on, if you see what I mean. Ambivalence is, I like it. I wasn't expecting it to extend into this hour, but it is, you're talking about people who are choosing not to do anything rather than people who are incapable of doing more. And what do they live on?
You could, so living-wise, I think it's each to their own individuality. I've lived the last good couple months on my own without employment by buying and selling cars or Facebook Marketplace, not
But that's
as
a job.
Successfully as I would have hoped.
Okay.
You may be interesting to hear about, but I think it is down to their situations. But just from a standpoint, because I found myself getting stuck in a rut similar to what you've described.
Yes.
And it is because of this great overwhelming sense of impending doom, just like the climate change we were discussing earlier. Because
so
you
what's
see
the point?
The world of responsibility crushing in around you, and you simply feel too small to sort of grab it by the reins, so to speak.
I hadn't put that on the list because that is something that you could, for want of a better phrase, you could snap out of. That isn't something that is chemical or medical or mental. It is lower down the list of problems. It's something that you're feeling oppressed by reality. And
absolutely,
you could train yourself to feel less oppressed. But this is the mystery, and this is why I never get the calls, Ben. I don't understand why. There's 869,000 people in this category. They won't all be suffering from what you're describing. But, among your peer... How old are you, 19?
I'm 19.
So among your peer group, how many people are reliant largely for their basic needs on their mums and dads?
So it's interesting because in my sort of group of people that I know, I am the only person who would be unemployed and not actively seeking work. Oh. And that is because I've simply been able to find other situations of which I can live. In regards to them, I think even with employment...
So they're doing normal jobs.
Live on their own.
They're doing normal jobs.
They still live on their own. They still get parents to help out and pay for car insurance here and there. I've spent the last year living on my own up in London. I moved from down in Dorset, little country boy, and just have had to sort of force away. And I think it's
what was your income?
What
was your income during that period?
I was definitely employed for the majority of
I'm not finding these people. I don't know why. This is the most popular radio phone-in show in the history of radio phone-in shows. But where are these young people?
Their heads buried very deep inside TikTok or YouTube.
Yeah, but their mums and dads won't be. They're upstairs buried inside TikTok and YouTube. What are they living on? How are they living?
That's a good point. And honestly, I cannot answer that question. But I just thought I would call in.
So you are making a living, but you haven't got a job, as it were.
That is exactly it.
And because you're not doing it from a car lot or you're not doing it from a lay-by, you're not getting counted in the way that other people who trade in cars would be counted. I hope it works out for you. I'm sorry to hear it's not going as well as you might have hoped. But, hang in there. Thank you, Ben. That's the bit I don't get. I still don't get it, is that you would have... maybe you're a bit embarrassed. You shouldn't be. It's me, But you can't persuade your child that it's worth doing the things that they can't be persuaded to do. But they tell me they're too tired. They tell me they're too depressed. And I kind of believe them. I didn't believe them at first. But why would anyone choose this life? And then perhaps the technology does become something that is generational. Is that the for want of a better word, the fullness of the life you can lead in your bedroom now is such that it is a lot more tempting than it seemed 30 years ago. So when I first started doing this job, and the idea that people were choosing to be unemployed so that they could watch Jeremy Kyle all day was obviously ridiculous. Maybe in the world of technology you can have an income, or you can have some sort of livelihood, or you can have enough stimulation. But how do mum and dad deal with that? Where are all these teenagers who are not looking for work? They're not in education, they're not in training, and they are not looking for a job. 16 to 24-year-olds is very much the category that we are exclusively discussing today. Speaking of exclusively discussing things, this is the only place on the planet where you can listen to Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, casting her eye over what is likely to happen at PMQs later today. I think that my analysis of Kemi Badenoch is perfect. You watch her and you're trying to work out what's wrong. What is wrong with this woman? The one who says, I never do gaffes because I think so carefully about what I'm going to say, and then does 10 gaffes a minute. The one who said that she became working class when she goes to McDonald's. It's because she is someone who thinks they're a superhero but hasn't yet found their superpower. So she keeps doing things, expecting to take off or explode or launch a web that will catch her enemies in its sticky claws. But she's not got any superpowers. I wonder what's going to happen when she realises that. Anyway, that's coming up. at 12ish. Then we're going to talk to Gabriel Gatehouse, who has, I think, predicted Trump better than almost any other British journalist, and it's not a pretty listen or indeed a uplifting read, but we'll have a look at that. And then the doyen of food writers, Jay Rayner of The Observer, and of course of various television entertainments and radio programs. He's going to talk to us about the biggest scandal of the week. Scandal's not quite the right word. Disaster. The biggest. You think the climate change stuff is apocalyptic. You think the climate change conversation flirts with the doors of disaster. Wait until you hear what Jay Rayner is going to be talking to us about shortly after 12:45 today. But first, Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34. Was he carrying a family of geese? Asked James in Hammersmith. No, he was not carrying a family of geese. Some of the answers, I don't know. I don't think we'll ever do a phone-in about it because none of us are qualified to do it. But why some things that fill this space would be funny and other things would not. The idea that a champion strongman who claimed a car crash had left him too weak to hold shopping bags has been filmed lifting a Ford Transit. And that's funny, right? But concrete balls, less so. Anyway, now you know. I've got another one for you later involving Justin Welby, but it is, frankly, extraordinary. I need to triple check that it's true. 11:35 is the time. Ollie is in Surbiton. Ollie, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello.
I think the unemployment thing's so complex. I'm sure you'd agree. Like there's
yes, yeah. I've come up with 3 possible answers to it, but there's probably 103.
Yeah, I think so, and I think a huge one for me personally is pressures on that generation now. I mean, I'm 31, so I'm just outside of that generation, but I definitely felt these pressures to a degree throughout my earlier years, and I think, you know,
what pressures? So you're 20 years younger than me. What pressures were you exposed to that I wasn't?
Social media. I think social media. I think the general pressures of that generation. I think young people, generally on a day-to-day basis, you're exposed to stories of success and all these sorts of things through Instagram, through TikTok. You see people living these lives. And I think...
So you give up. You give up at quite an early age.
Well, I think that's it. And I think the workplace is such a one-size-fits-all place. And I know that everybody tries... There's such a huge effort, or you're told, particularly by big companies, that they're making a huge effort to accommodate more people and to be more inclusive and to bring people's talents. That, you know, I have ADHD, but I had about 6,504 jobs by the time I was 30.
Okay.
Because... for me, it was that pushing water uphill thing.
So you couldn't find a fit. You couldn't find something that fit you.
I couldn't find a fit. And I think in days gone, I mean, ADHD isn't new, you know, neurodiversity, things like that. None of that's new. But in days of old, there was less pressure to... You could find
a rut, for want of a better word. And also you weren't constantly having siren voices whisper in your ear that, you know, you could be...
Why don't you want a yacht?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why don't you? You know, there's that element of you could settle down into another job or into another role that is in no way whatsoever any less significant or worthy of, you know, a career.
So status anxiety.
100%. That's definitely a massive part of it. And I think, you know, you'll probably remember from maybe your generation.
Be careful, mate. Don't call me granddad.
I'm going steady, but I think, you know, my parents certainly, you get your values and you learn your sense of what life should look like more from your family and the immediate around you, or perhaps did, but now you're told how you should live your life and what success looks like by quite often people that have inherited loads of wealth, or, you know, people that, and you get that on a day-to-day, like,
I think this is, I think I got this wrong a bit. I think because I'm thinking about measurable health issues and good days and bad days, but actually, you're talking about something more systemic, and it's a breach of a social contract. It's as if even if your job is grinding and difficult, the sense that it was worth doing has gone.
Yeah, 100% there's that, and I think also the good days and the bad days part. You know, for an example, I've gone self-employed so that I can build a career that fits my good days and my bad days.
Yes.
I've had to do that.
But you're not going to do that when you're 17. You're going to have to go on the journey you've been on with your 564 jobs that didn't work out before you realise you've got little choice but to actually create your own space, your own workspace.
Exactly. But I think the pressure, it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. So you've got a generation of younger people that have the good days and they have the bad days. And not only do they have to contend with that, they have to contend with the shame that's quite often put on this generation. For, children used to be considered the future. Now they're just considered widely a burden. Do
you think so?
I think so. I think that's the narrative that a lot of people feel. And I think that if you're having a bad day and you're lying in bed, the shame that you're going to have for feeling bad, which only compounds the issue, is only going to keep you there and is only going to push you further and further away from finding work.
The academic version of that, coming from the chief executive of the Learning and Work Institute, you're talking about a kind of spiral, aren't you? And he says the employment rate has been falling for over 2 years. This is storing up trouble and risks long-term damage to their career prospects and the economy. So the further into this, we call it a slough of despondency. And the difference between your generation and my generation is that the despondency is logical.
Yeah.
So I can sit here and go, well, I'll find you a message. Let me go into the inbox. Here you go. Alan's in Derby. Give this caller a tissue. Grow up, man. Life is not a free ride like this generation wants. There's Alan demonstrating almost all of the points that you make, but being too thick to understand any of them. Because when he was your age, that transaction was clear. And if you put in the shift and you put in the work, you would do well enough to achieve a certain level of, call it success, call it status, or call it security, whatever you want to call it. For the younger generation, they don't feel that. And that's logical. So the longer you're in that slough of despondency, the more likely it is that you'll never get out of it. That's inevitable, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's the shame. And it's people like Alan that actually, and their opinion, incredibly narrow-minded, that compound the situation and the issue further and further and further.
Yes. Because you've got your own voices in your head telling you you're useless and you're worthless, and if people like Alan in Derby join in, it just gets louder.
Correct. And that's the problem. And I think there is a whole pocket of that generation. Obviously, I have zero data or numbers to quantify that, but there is a whole pocket of that generation that are on that merry-go-round. They're on that roller coaster of life is rubbish, life is awful.
And this is the bit my generation won't get, because we might have felt, I'd rather stay in bed today, or we might have felt, I deserve more than this, or we might, but we had, I talking to Mum again yesterday about buying a house, and it was 3 times what you earned. So even if your job was awful, you could buy a house. And so it makes everything different. It makes everything change. And yet so there is the generational divide, and that's why property is a big part of it, but by no means the only part. Thank you, Ollie. That was really helpful, really helpful. I think this has happened before, where I've tried to break it down in one way, and the breach of the social contract has come careering into the conversation in a way that is very, very hard to grasp fully unless you're living it. Do you know what I mean? And I bet there's a parental divide as well. I get it on the phones, you not so much anymore, but you'd always get people say, I don't know what these young people are complaining about. When I was their age, I did this, and this, and you just do some very basic maths. And you'd say, yes, but when you did this, and this, what did you get in return? And they'd say, well, that, and that. And I'd say, well, these kids get none of that. So the idea that and that's why, perhaps incorrectly, I am very, very interested by the question of what you then live on. Because it strikes me that there must be people living at home with parents who either do or don't understand what I have chosen to describe as the slough of despondency, but who are supporting their children while they dwell in it. And that there must be hundreds of thousands of families in that position. 11:43 is the time. Maisie is in Bradford. Maisie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hiya. I was just calling to talk because I feel like this is a really sort of overrepresented group, and I do understand that it's record numbers and everything. But I'm in college studying my A-levels. I'm in my final year, 5 days a week, and then any spare time that I do have, I'm working. And it's the same with like pretty much all of my friends. I think there's one person that I know that doesn't have a full-time job.
Yeah, this is... So I probably should have explained this better. That's dog bites man. That is normal and widespread and commonplace and what everybody expects to be happening.
Yeah.
The conversation is about man bites dog. It's about the freakishly high numbers of people who are not in the space you describe. But the space you describe is obviously going to be much, much bigger than the space that we're talking about.
Yeah, of course. But I think the reason that a lot of people are very reluctant to get into, the part-time jobs and stuff is simply because of the pay.
Yes.
Because, I've been working since I was like 14.
Have you?
At that point, I was on £4.80 an hour at that point, and now I'm on a massive £6.40 an hour. So, and I'm a waitress, and I really do work hard. And
how many hours do you do of a weekend?
I do between 13 and 16 at the minute.
So so less than £100.
Yeah.
For 2 shifts, that would it?
Yeah.
2 Saturday and Sunday. And how far does it go is the question, isn't it? That's because, I was a waiter at your age. And I felt rich, would you believe? I genuinely felt rich. I forget what the hourly rate was, but I'd come home with pound coins in my pocket. Almost so many pound coins, I'd pulling my trousers down. I had more disposable income. But of course, if you're earning that kind of money and then you're going to the shops and it's not touching the sides of the things that you want to buy, the motivation dissipates, the motivation dilutes.
Yeah, I think that's the main problem at the minute, is just the fact that, the payoff that you actually do get for going and working is so minimal in comparison to the effort that you actually have to put in.
And for people less motivated than you, for whatever reasons... There is and especially if they've got parents who are prepared to support them or to slip them 50 quid for a night out, then the calculation of how much will my life improve if I go to work, the answer is not enough to justify going to work.
No, exactly. I think that's the issue.
I think you are. I think you're right as well. Do you know, we had a fella on earlier this week, Maisie, who runs the kind of place where you work, and he was saying they were going to have to shut because the government was making them pay people like you a couple of quid more.
Yeah, well, I think if you can't run an effective business that's, bringing in enough profit to pay people a living wage, then the issue is your business, not the government. Could we please make Maisie Chancellor of the Exchequer? I think this is that. Thank you, because I think that's true as well. But it's really helpful to hear it from the other side of that contract, as it were, the other side of that employer-employee conversation. He was a nice lad. I mean, we ambushed him slightly. It was all Ian's fault, who made me ask him what car he drove. It turned out he was driving a £100,000 car, albeit that it'd be 40,000 second-hand, while saying that he couldn't afford to pay people like Maisie the wage that the Chancellor of the Exchequer will insist that they start paying next year. But anyway, all human life is here. Maisie, that was really helpful to me. Thank you. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:49. I am... all hail Maisie, if you're still listening. That's a message that's come in from Paul on Blue Sky. I am going to be reading out my messages on Blue Sky, which is a rapidly growing, newish social media. So I ate a wine gum in the break then. I shouldn't have done, should I? You can tell. Sorry. That's appallingly unprofessional of me. But at least I tell you. I don't sit you there wondering what's happened to his voice. No, don't make that noise in my ear, Keith. Just because it's the noise I'm making in everybody else's ear doesn't make it right. That's better. But at the moment, I'm getting too many nice greetings. I can't read all those out. But Maisie, a lot of love for Maisie. Well, Maisie not only made me laugh out loud, but she got a round of applause from me as well. What a wonderful contribution. So as we move forward, I'll be reading messages from Blue Sky and not from the other place. You can find me there as Mr. James O.B., but it's a bit tricky today because so many people are taking a bit of time out to kindly say hello. Here is a mystery for the morning. The Daily Mail have written an article about Justin Welby's resignation. Who do you think they have managed to imply is responsible for his decline, for his situation? Who do you think the Daily Mail have managed to imply is responsible for Justin Welby's situation? Is it A, John Smythe, the serial child sex abuser, who Welby stands accused of not properly investigating? Is it B, Boris Johnson, who was Prime Minister during one of the more relevant periods of Welby's primacy? Or is it C, Meghan Markle, for reasons? So who do you think the Daily Mail today impute some responsibility for Justin Welby's resignation? Is it A, John Smythe, the actual paedophile? Is it B, Boris Johnson, the actual Prime Minister for much of this period? Or is it C, Meghan Markle, the actual wife of Prince Harry? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, isn't it? But you probably think I'm joking. I'm not. How Justin Welby fell under Harry and Meghan's spell as Archbishop of Canterbury resigns over ignoring prolific sex abusers' crimes, how his friendship with the Sussexes raised questions about his judgment. So come here a minute. I told you years ago, right, that there was not a story in the universe that certain members of the media wouldn't try and blame on Meghan Markle. And you thought I was exaggerating. If you'd said to me that day, do you honestly think that if the Archbishop of Canterbury resigns over a child sex abuse scandal, they'll try and blame it on Meghan Markle? Do you know what I would have said? I'd have said, no, all right, maybe not every story. Maybe not every bad thing that happens in the UK could be turned into a story about Meghan Markle. And guess what? I'd have been wrong. Because here is a story about a child sex abuse scandal engulfing the Church of England and prompting the resignation of Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Mail have turned it into a story about Meghan Markle. So if you thought I was exaggerating then, I looked at the camera then, that's how cross I am, pointing at it now. If you thought I was exaggerating when I said that these ghouls would turn anything negative into a story about Meghan Markle, then today's the day that you have to apologise. And I'll wait, okay? 11:53 is the time. Back to young people, not working, not studying. Why? Emily is in Winsford in Cheshire. Emily, what made you pick up the phone?
Hiya, James. You all right?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right, yeah.
Excellent.
So basically, my dad's a big fan of you.
Okay.
And he heard you on the radio.
Right.
But basically, I spent my whole summer, because I broke up for college, June, July-ish, and I spent my whole summer handing out my CV around my town, going places, applying to jobs everywhere, and it's just only one or two people got back to me.
So you want to, and this was just in the holidays. So
yeah,
you're
of
not,
course I do.
You're in college full time.
I'm in college full time.
So the jobs aren't there. If you weren't in college and you were looking for a job, you wouldn't be able to find one. Is the worry?
No, it's like nobody wants to hire people in college. Nobody wants to hire people working part time, and I don't know.
I don't know either. And did you get any feedback at all from the people who did respond?
Yeah, I got one back from, I think it was Domino's or something, and she was like, do you want to work on the weekends or weekdays? And I said, I'm not available on the weekdays because I'm in education. And she was like, sorry, there's no availability this time.
So they wanted someone who could, just not just. Did you try? And you're too young to get a job in the Red Lion, are you? Or could you have gone down the Red Lion or the Prince's Feathers?
I'm 18, but I'm 18, but I don't know. There's no opportunities. They're not hiring.
And how does that affect you? How does that impact upon your ability to enjoy life and to do things that you want to do?
Well, I don't know. I feel like I lack a lot of independence with it.
Yeah.
You had a caller before mention they feel worthless, I think. But for me personally, that's not the case.
Good.
I think it's more just feeling stuck, not being able to do my own thing on my own.
What are you doing at college? A-levels or have you finished your A-levels?
No, I'm on BTEC. But
okay, and do you know what you want to do with that? Do you know what you want to do next?
Well, I'm thinking uni, but...
Yeah, wait and see.
It's quite costly, do you know what I mean?
Well, it can be, but make sure you check the numbers, because you don't need to pay anything. Yeah. You don't need to pay anything back until you
get a job.
Until you get a job and start earning over a certain amount. And if you never start earning over that amount, then eventually, after many, many years, the loan disappears together. I don't know what to say. If there's anyone in Winsford listening who wants a bright and enthusiastic young person to work for them at weekends, then we'll get in touch and we'll put them in touch with you, Emily.
Thanks.
But it just feels unfair, doesn't it? What would be your dream job? What would be your dream weekend job?
Weekend job? Yeah,
what would be your dream? You're looking for a weekend job, aren't you? A job at weekends.
Yeah, so anything. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't care.
Okay. Have you got a Morrison's in Winsford?
Yeah, I've applied there.
You went in there as well?
Didn't get back to me.
Well, listen, if anyone at Morrison's in Winsford is listening, sort yourselves out. This is an appalling way to treat the younger generation. And obviously, you've missed a massive opportunity by not signing up Emily immediately. And if you do give her a job, let her choose which department. James. Tell her what department. What department would you like to be in, Emily?
What do you mean department?
Bakery, baked goods. What do you mean department? Yeah. Which bit of the supermarket would you be happiest in?
Are you actually? Is that rhetorical? Or are you actually?
No, I'm asking. No. You say your dad listens. What?
Floor worker.
Yeah, there we go.
Stacking shelves and that.
Yeah, and also giving people help. I like that. If someone will come up to you and say, "Excuse me, where are the beans?" and you'll say, "Is that a rhetorical question, or are you actually asking me?" Where are the beans? It's one of the great mysteries of life. Thank you, Emily. We need to be reminded of that as well. That would be category 3 on the list that we put together, albeit that you are in full-time education. But you are age 16 to 24, you are bright, you are looking for work, and you are being told repeatedly that there isn't any. Partly, I imagine, because employers are looking for people that can make a bigger commitment over the course of the weekly period. Regards to your dad as well, Emily, thank you. Sounds like a man of impeccable taste in radio presenters. It's coming up to 11:58. Natasha will be joining me shortly to look forward to PM Qs, where, is it wrong? I don't know what this means. But I thought that Keir Starmer was going to be in Baku for PMQs. And I was sad because it meant I'd miss Kemi Badenoch. And I'm just finding her so amusing that I would have been slightly dismayed if she wasn't in the chair this week. But I am, Natasha, reliably informed that Starmer's back.
He's back. He was back
from
last
Azerbaijan.
Night.
Yeah. He's Azerbaijan back.
I'm glad you're as excited as me, because I was thinking about this late last night, and I think for the first time excited for Prime Minister's questions.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily good for her, because I'm just wondering which foot she's going to stick in her mouth next.
Yeah, I think you know, the view amongst the commentariat, the columnists, the sketch writers were, obviously, they always take the mick out of politicians in the chamber. It doesn't matter what you do, you get a rinsing from the sketch writers. But actually, I think generally most people did not think it was a fantastic first outing for Kemi Badenoch.
My favourite bit was her banging on about him reading out his answers while reading out her questions, and then accusing the Chancellor of never having mentioned the defence in her budget, which she had done several times.
Which she'd done, exactly.
But at least she never does gaffes.
No, she doesn't. At least she doesn't, get asked to predict things every week at Prime Minister's Questions and usually get them wrong. So,
Yeah, but it's fun. It's all the fun of the fair. It's not our job to get this stuff right. It's our job to speculate. And sometimes being wrong delights people listening more than being right does.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm glad I can delight listeners every week, reliably so.
Lots of delight on the way. What do you think might come up?
Well, I think actually, second Prime Minister's Questions, obviously, she went in with a bang, whether you like it or not, whether you're a Marmite pro Kemi Badenoch or not. She went in with a bang. She talked about Donald Trump. She had a lot of punchy jibes at the Prime Minister from her new position as Leader of the Opposition. This week, I think she might want to try and put this blue line between Labour and the Tories by talking about a little bit more about what the difference is between the two main parties. Now, one thing that she could talk about, fresh from Baku, is COP. Net zero is something that she has been sceptical about in the past, about the climate change targets. And as the Prime Minister has launched a hugely ambitious new climate change target going up to 81% of cutting emissions from 1990 levels, I wonder whether she might want to use that and say, well, actually, what's the plan, Prime Minister? How are we going to do this? Does it mean we're all going to have to go vegetarian and fly less? Or does, where are the workings? Where are the numbers? Because in the last 24 hours, the Prime Minister has got a little bit of stick that he has agreed to a new target, but actually not said exactly how we're going to get there.
Didn't she? I know that she took £10,000 from the chair of the Tufton Street Climate Denial Group, and didn't she borrow the House of Neil record for her campaign? Was it his? He's very much one of the Tufton Street head honchos.
The net zero sort of skeptics, as they were, very embedded within the Conservative Party, not just with sort of front runners like Kemi Badenoch, but lots of Conservatives share deep scepticism of net zero, of climate change, and exactly how fast we're going to get it.
But as we often discover, that there are fossil fuel considerations in place for a lot of these people. Not saying necessarily the ones that we've.
Although we should also say that the Labour Party have accepted donations, which you've covered on the show before, from Cayman Island backed fossil fuel linked companies too. So it's something that infiltrates.
But we're not
everywhere
expecting.
politics.
We're not expecting Keir Starmer to get on his feet today and deny climate change.
No, but I think there is a question.
I just need to check that. I just want to make sure that he did actually give a.
There is a lot of questions about where we go with this plan. Keir Starmer's talked about sort of climate change.
Yeah, she used Neil Records' house as her campaign office, the head of Net Zero Watch, former head
Net
honcho,
Zero Watch, that's the one.
Former head honcho in the Institute, so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, and also a key figure in that weird organisation that tried to get the National Trust to stop publishing the history of National Trust houses in National Trust houses. So didn't just make a 5-figure donation to her leadership campaign, also lent her his house from which to run her campaign. So you're right, she may have an awful lot to say about net zero and climate change, almost all of which, no doubt, would be music to the ears of this character. We shall see. Anything else?
Well, I was also wondering whether they might want to talk about the upcoming farmers' protest. Trying to differentiate between Labour and the Tories in terms of the budget might be something that I think at some point will happen. I was surprised she didn't do it last week. Maybe she'll bring it up this week, how the budget they feel is not fair on working people. It's actually putting taxes up, and we've got this looming farmers' protest that's coming up in Westminster next week. I wonder if Kemi Badenoch might want to talk about that, and especially
she had fairly strong views on Just Stop Oil protesters, didn't she? So presumably it'd be exactly the same. You can't go around disrupting the public to make your own political point. So the Conservatives...
Apart from if you drive a tractor into Westminster, then it's all fair game.
They introduced legislation to stop people from making peaceful protests. They were arresting people left, right and centre. They even changed the law to make it easier. People went to jail, so she'll be calling for farmers to be jailed.
Yes, I'm sure she will.
or will we possibly be seeing some extraordinary exercises in hypocrisy?
Yeah, but I think for Kemi Badenoch, what she needs to do now is differentiate herself from the Labour opposition and start talking about how she's going to be doing things differently, rightly or wrongly.
Yes, and she did try to do that last week. The Trump stuff's weird, though.
Just don't think that landed well.
Being pro-Trump is arguably being anti-UK now. And I know that she pretends that conversations are trade deals, and one of the group that pretends the Australia deal was anything other than embarrassing for the UK. But Daniel Hannan writing in the Mail today, they've learnt nothing. We'll be supplicants in a trade deal with Donald Trump's America, and therefore encouraging it or signing up for it would not necessarily be in the national interest. But
potentially, it's a conversation that the Labour government are shying away from and have to have at the moment. Yeah. If Trump is going to threaten 20% tariffs, you'd like to expect that Kemi Badenoch will be talking about whether the government would be liking to push for a trade deal or not. Because actually, if we don't, and they decide to give preferential treatment to other countries, then we could be really whacked by this. And at the moment, the government are quite cool on it.
Yeah, well, the needle that needs to be threaded, I read today in a rather good piece by someone I've forgotten who wrote it, that it needs to move closer to Europe on defence and security, while in precisely the context you described, trying to cozy up to Donald Trump's America on trade, which Europe will not like. And America will not like cozying up to Europe on defence and security. Yeah. So Donald Trump's America. So it is... anyway, it's time for PMQ.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can plant as many questions as is like with his backbenchers. But at the end of the day, I'm the one he has to face at the dispatch box. And I welcome him, Mr. Speaker. I welcome him back from... Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister back from his trip to Azerbaijan, where he has unilaterally made commitments that will make life more experienced for everyone back home. Speaking of making life...
Somebody's suggesting reading. I think if you notice, the Prime Minister also reads. So please get your...
And Mr. Speaker, I can pre-prepare my questions, but he needs to answer from his mind. Yes. Speaking of making life...
Responsible for the answers.
So he has made life more expensive with his unilateral commitments, but speaking of making life more expensive, will the Prime Minister confirm that he will keep the cap on council tax?
Mr. Speaker, she talks of the trip to COP. I'm very proud of the fact that we're restoring leadership on climate to this country, the UK, because that will be measured in lower bills on energy independence and the jobs of the future. And in relation, and she may have missed, but on Monday I was very pleased to announce a huge order into jobs in Hull for blades for offshore wind. If she's opposed to that sort of action, she should go to Hull and say so. On the question of council, she knows what the arrangements are.
I think the House would have heard that the Prime Minister could neither confirm nor deny whether there was a cap in council tax was being raised. So I will ask him this question. How much extra does he expect local authorities will have to raise to cover the social care funding gap created by the Chancellor's budget and increases in employers' NI? He told the member for Edinburgh West just now that he was covering social care. How much extra does he expect local authorities to raise?
It's all very well, this knockabout, but not actually listening to what I said 3 minutes ago. There's a bit of a fundamental failure of the Leader of the Opposition. I just said £600 million. I repeat it, £600 million.
That he has repeated that number because he has probably not listened to the Labour-run LGA, who said that with no separate funding for the Chancellor's budget announcements, care providers will likely see increased costs, which will cost councils more, and all of the £600 in grant increase he is giving will not cover what is required for adult social care. It is clear that they had not thought through the impact of the budget, and this is the problem with having a copy and paste Chancellor. Did they not realise that care homes, GP surgeries, children's nurseries, hospices, and even charities have to pay employers' NI?
We have put more money into local authorities than they did in 14 years. They left them in an absolutely catastrophic state. We produced a budget which does not increase tax on working people, nothing in the payslip. Investing in our NHS, investing in our schools so every child can go as far as their talent will take them, investing in the houses of the future. If she's against those things, she should say so.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not against any of those things. But, of course not. None of us are against any of those things. But he has confirmed that he does not know what is going on. The Prime Minister probably does not realise that on Monday, the Ministry for Communities, Local Government and Housing revealed that councils will need to find an additional £2.4 billion in council tax next year. That's a lot more than £600 million. I know that he's been away, but did the Deputy Prime Minister, who runs that department, make him aware of their £2.4 billion black hole?
So let me get this straight, Mr. Speaker. She doesn't want any of the measures in the budget, but she wants all the benefits. So the magic money tree is back after 2 weeks in office. 2 weeks in office. They've learned absolutely nothing. We've put forward a budget which takes the difficult decisions, fixing the £22 billion black hole that they left, investing in the future of our country. They say they want all of that, but they don't know how they're going to pay for it. Same old Tories.
Mr. Speaker, even he has to admit that they fiddled the fiscal rules. The OBR has actually said that they don't recognise where the additional growth is going to come from. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, the rise in employers' national insurance is going to be a disaster for small businesses around the country. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about Kelly. For over 20 years, Kelly has run an after-school club business supporting 500 children and families in her borough. In 2024, her national insurance cost was about £10,000. In April, this will rise to £26,000. That is a 150% increase in costs from the budget alone. What is the Prime Minister's message to Kelly and the 500 families her small business supports if it goes under?
I would say this to Kelly. We inherited a very badly damaged economy. We inherited a £22 billion black hole, and we were not prepared to continue with the fiction. We stabilised...
Ms Lopez, I'm sure I couldn't expect better from you as a PPS as well, Prime Minister.
I would say to Kelly, we are fixing the mess that we were left. We're investing in the future of our country. I would also say to her that the Leader of the Opposition, week 2, wants all the benefits from the budget, but has no way of saying how she's going to pay for it. Same old mistake over and over again.
Mr. Speaker, he has nothing to offer except platitudes. And the fact is that they do not know what they're doing. Their ideological budget was designed to milk the private sector and hope nobody would notice. Now his cabinet ministers are all queuing up for public sector bailouts to his tax mess. If he is going to bail out the public sector, then can he tell us this? Does he think it is appropriate, as the Ministry for Housing has done, to approve a 4-day week for councils that is not flexible working, but is actually part-time work for full-time pay?
Questions based on we're actually doing are usually better than fantasy questions made up. Mr. Speaker, what did they deliver in 14 years? Low growth, stagnant economy, a disastrous mini-budget, a £22 billion PATCO, and now she wants to give me advice on running the economy. I don't want to be rude, but no, thank you very much.
Patrick, yes, you, right at the end, Patrick. So,
thank you, Mr. Speaker. Towns like mine in Southport need investment and support after 14 years of decline from the party opposite. So can the Prime Minister confirm that his budget will provide that much-needed investment for towns like mine, and further confirm that, unlike the previous government, my local authority and the public services that my town relies on will be finally properly supported?
Can I begin by paying tribute to my honourable friend and to his constituents in Southport? They've shown extraordinary courage and resilience as they try to rebuild from the devastating tragedy and loss earlier this year. We will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Southport are supported now and in the years to come. The budget is designed to fix the crucial services that his constituents rely on, including £1.3 billion of new funding for local government, an investment in safer streets, in our NHS for the future, and that's the direction in which we're taking the country.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to fixing the crisis in the NHS that he's inherited, the Prime Minister has rightly recognised the need to improve access to GPs. But like my honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh West, GPs in my constituency are writing to me to tell me how worried they are about the impact of the national insurance hike on patient care. So listen very carefully to what he said to my honourable friend, but I have to say I hope he can think again. Will he at least exempt GPs, community pharmacists and other health and care providers from this tax rise?
I hear the point he makes and I understand the concern. We have made a huge investment in our NHS, the biggest ever investment in our NHS for many, many years, and certainly almost all the people working in NHS are very, very pleased to see that investment in them and in their service. On the question of GPs, we will ensure they've got the resources that we need, and the funding arrangements will be set out in the usual way later this year.
Sir Ed David.
Speaker, I have to say I think patients and GPs and others listening to answer will want more reassurance and much more quickly. But if I may turn to the war in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker, a senior advisor to President-elect Trump, Donald Trump Jr., has shared a post on Instagram that declares that President Zelensky will soon, within the next few weeks, lose his allowance. If the Trump administration does withdraw support from our brave Ukrainian allies, will the UK and Europe step up to fill the gap? Will he seize frozen Russian assets, not just the interest, but the assets underlying that, so we can fund a huge boost to the Ukrainian forces in their fight against Putin's war machine?
Mr. Speaker, as he knows, we've been resolute and strong in our support for Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression, and I have been speaking, as he will know, in recent weeks with other leaders about how we put Ukraine in the best and strongest possible position at this time, and I'll continue those discussions. Thank you.
David Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Child poverty is a national scandal. In St Helens North, it increased by
12:16 is the time. Some Poignant words there at the end with regard to Ukraine and Russia. I suppose, given that Boris Johnson did several laps of honour over his early support for, and is a creditable support for Ukraine, it could be one of the areas where the House unites in opposition to what Donald Trump is apparently intending to do, which may be part of the reason. I don't know why Kemi Badenoch elected not to go back in with a sort of Donald Trump cheerleading angle as she did last week. We will pick over what she elected to do instead after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:18 is the time. It's utterly bewildering, writes Chris on Blue Sky. She seems so out of her depth, and I'm afraid for Kemi Badenoch's camp, that is very much the tone of responses. This is the gift that keeps on giving. Oh gosh, writes Duncan. She isn't finding her superpowers today, an allusion to my own little analysis earlier. And it's still a little bit difficult for me to read out your messages on this because I'm getting so many from people announcing that they've just arrived on Blue Sky and saying hello. This is just ridiculous, says Hecate, which I suspect is not their given name. And then back on the texts or the WhatsApps that have come into the studio, Chris writes, did she actually just say, I can have notes, but he can't? Pretty much, yes. Was the strongman, asks Dan, that you talked about earlier, found lifting the massive weight of Kemi Badenoch's ego? Gaff number one, says Terry. I'm sure she just said make life more experience instead of expensive. She also said £600 instead of £600 million, Terry. But remember, she doesn't do gaffs. Becky writes, oh my days, I don't think I can deal with Kemi every week. Becky, come on, stay with me. It's going to be fantastic.
It's going to be fun, Kelly.
Did she say, Loz says, questions need to be answered, checks notes from the mind.
Oh, I love that. I really like that.
Keir Starmer's mind.
Where does it come?
We'll answer questions from his mind.
It reminds me like Harry Potter-esque, when they sort of get the wand and pull
into my
eyes,
it out,
look into my, pull out the memories.
Yes, exactly. He's going to answer them with his mind. Good God, she's appalling, says Martin. Badenoch is potentially worse than Truss, says Dave. I am absolutely loving this. Did she just accuse Keir Starmer of not knowing what is going on? Neil in Skipton picks up a point a few people have made on that Liz Truss angle. He says Lettuce 2.0 appears to be in action. Jim Bob says, dear God, she is absolutely awful, like seriously awful. Marion asks, is she actually the opposition leader? Is this really the best that they can do? She wouldn't last 10 minutes in a school debating society. Unbelievably messy PMQs from Badenoch, says Jason. I have no idea what she's talking about. And let's start there, because I could read these all day. Although I'm with Mike on this, absolutely hilarious. She's brilliant. I agree. But it's very hard for you because she was all over the place. Whether you see that as a plus or a minus, and knowing what we know about Kemi Badenoch, she will no doubt see it as an enormous plus.
I think she will. I think she'll see the fact that this descended into an almighty messy punch-up as actually quite a successful Prime Minister's questions. I'm not sure I would agree. To me, I think I'd agree with that. Just last comment, messy is how I describe it. We used to talk about Boris Johnson being like a trolley, deliberately wavering in every single direction, going from the last person he spoke to. And there are a few ways I think you can do Prime Minister's questions, right? You can go in on a string of topics like this. She went on climate change, then the budget, then council tax funding, and then the 4-day week. I don't think that actually this is a really good strategy for anyone going into Prime Minister's questions, because I don't think you actually get enough time to really skewer the Prime Minister on any of these things. If you move between one thing to another, I think the best strategy that I think works for most leaders is going with a sort of theme and going to really pincer them on a few things. So climate change or the budget would have been really good for her to go on it. And I actually thought in the middle she picked up when she was talking about national insurance, when she was talking about GPs, when she was talking about that funding that we know there's a gap. I thought she picked up there, and then she went on to council tax, and then she went on to the 4-day week, and I just thought, what on earth are you doing? Where are you going with this?
And she embarrassed herself a bit again on the £600 million question.
Yeah, exactly. Saying that, called it, did she say £600
yeah, but
rather
she
than
also
600
said
million?
He hasn't answered the question, and he had.
And she also sort of said, the Prime Minister doesn't know what's going on. Well, just because he didn't answer the question you wanted doesn't mean he doesn't know what's going on. Interestingly, Keir Starmer pointedly refusing to answer the question on whether he will raise the cap that councils are allowed in order to raise their council tax by a certain percentage without having a referendum. It's currently 5%, and you can add on, I think, another 3% for social care. So maybe we are going to see something from the Prime Minister in the future on that. That seems like a potential way to raise money for councils.
We're going to be hearing this versions of this exchange for a long time. Is the government going to raise more money? Answer, we have to, because of what was left behind, and rinse and repeat ad infinitum.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a right and a wrong in that exchange. We have to, because, well, I suppose they're right, they have to, but also people would rather you didn't. It's just a question of whether or not but that's probably what the next election will be fought on, whether or not people believe, A, that you had to, and B, that you did it efficiently and effectively.
Yeah, I think, they've not got long to sort of go and prove themselves. David Blunkett made some really interesting comments to a think tank yesterday, the IFG, talking about how, believes that, we are going to face a Trump moment here if they don't deliver, if they don't get on with it and they don't show that they've done so. Keir Starmer is clearly really comfortable making the argument for higher taxes.
Yes.
He's clearly in his element to be able to defend this budget, say this is a budget that puts no extra taxes on working people and really defends the NHS and public services and gets them fit for purpose. He needs to continue making that argument. But, I think there were some areas where Kemi really could have nailed him a little bit on some of these changes. Like I say, we talked about the farmers, we talked about the holes in the budget, we've talked about GPs. But she didn't really, there was no knockout blows there. She, if it was a boxing match, it felt very much like Keir Starmer sort of like dodging every single punch. And I don't think she was nearly as successful as she thought she was. They seem ready to fight. This is going to be a pretty punchy Prime Minister's question.
We'll get on to that shortly, that element of it shortly. But are we flirting with the possibility that she actually did better last week?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I didn't agree with the topic last week, but I thought her delivery was better last week. This time I thought her delivery was less good. But, it goes back to the question that you said before. These guys picked her because she thought she was going to be fantastic at tearing strips off Keir Starmer. So far, I think, the strategy of him sort of rising above it, not getting too angry or frustrated with her and what she's saying worked well last week. Yes. He obviously lost his cool a bit this week.
Well, he found Boris Johnson repellent, I think, but with good reason, I would argue, particularly morally and in terms of probity and honesty before the House, which is how essentially he kebabbed him slowly but surely. I think he found Sunak a little bit baffling.
I think they got on though.
But there was a mutual a form of respect. I think that what they had in common was a desire to get on with the job, whether you were doing it for different reasons or deploying different tactics. You sense that they'd both rather be actually forming policy and trying to change the country.
Yeah, public service and duty was something that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer shared. I'm not sure that Keir Starmer is going to see that in Kemi Badenoch.
He seems to find her ridiculous, is the word I would use.
Yeah, I think he finds
and that's why
baffling.
His patience wore thin, I think. This is why am I wasting my time dealing with this absolute nonsense?
Yeah, absurdity is, I think, how he looks at her. And there is no love lost between those two. I don't think, personally, behind the scenes, they will be getting on at all. I can't see how they will. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. It's going to be a long few years if this is Prime Minister's Questions every week, isn't it? It's entertaining, though.
I suffer from excess empathy, Natasha. I don't know if we've been working together long enough for you to have picked up on this, but it is my curse. It is the curse of many liberals, is that we're far too nice. So don't laugh. I worry if things carry on like this, then, and everyone will get very cross with me if this does happen.
I'm going to say this S word.
I might end up feeling sorry for her.
Oh, you feeling sorry for Kemi Badenoch?
There was one shot there where, because she obviously does think she's brilliant. She thinks she's absolutely brilliant. And you see that in most. But when it starts crossing her mind and her face, crucially her face, that she isn't.
It's like a puppy that's been kicked.
Yeah.
But
a really yappy puppy.
But look, it's defence of anybody that sits in that role as sort of leader of the opposition. You're trying to kick without being get kicked back yourself, aren't you? And sometimes the whiplash, I think, can go back to you when you're in that chair. It's a really tough job, and actually, if it just goes to show just how tough of a job it is, you'd think that after 3 months with no real Tory leader of the opposition, that a Labour budget which has gone down not fantastically well, and 100 days of Keir Starmer's government that have been a little rocky, I think, to say the least. You'd think this would be an open goal for Kemi Badenoch to talk about a string of issues that she feels that he's done wrong. But actually, if she's not really landing any of these blows now, firstly, it shows just how hard Prime Minister's Questions is for a leader of the opposition. And yeah, exactly. I think going forward, she's got a lot of opportunity, but she really needs to step up her performance, doesn't she?
Well, we shall see. I'm sure she disagrees passionately. I did say to you, I don't know whether you were paying any attention, but I did say to you, give it 10 minutes and she'll be claiming that she's doing the weave when we were talking about how much scattergun approach was in play, and she'd just jump around to this and that and the other. Steve, mind works like mine, who's texted to say she is using the weave, James. Quite a few people are asking you to remind them how many letters of no confidence need to be submitted to the head of the 22 in order for a leadership battle to ensue. They won't fancy the chaos of that for a long time. No. Don't think she'll fight. Personally, don't think she'll lead them into the next election if she carries on this trajectory.
Look, she is 2 weeks in. We are so far too early to be making predictions about this. I personally don't think she will fight the next election as leader of the Conservative Party. But, the Conservatives are really good at getting out their leaders if they don't believe that they're good enough. Yes. I don't think that they're anywhere near the appetite for forcing someone out within a year. They will give her time. They have to, because, Keir Starmer is very right to continue to press on the public the chaos of the Conservatives and the chaos that, really embodied the Conservative Party over the last 5 years. They've got to show that they have moved on from that. And if she can't do that, that's when they'll act.
Yes.
But, another leadership contest means more chaos. They're not going to do it.
And I'll start asking you when.
A year. I think she's got more time than a year.
I do too, but the noises will start in a year.
Yeah, but she will get better. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I can go up against Prime Minister Square. I, didn't go to Debating Society or the Oxford Union, so my debating skills are less than par, and I would not feel like this is anywhere near something I could do on a weekly basis. Go up and I just don't think it's an easy thing to do for anyone.
Bruce says, bring back William Hague, and Phil has been in touch. I told you this would happen. You thought I was exaggerating. Phil's been in touch to say, feeling sorry for her. Give your head please, and with respect, give your head a little wobble,
James. Should I give him a little flick on the way
All the best, Phil in Thornbury. And I think we'll give the last word to Stuart on this one, who I am 99.9% certain is referring to me, Natasha,
but you're not just a 1% chance.
Well, you never know. He says, you are not nice. You are a nasty piece of work.
Well, I didn't say that you weren't. I didn't say that you weren't nice. Yeah, that was definitely you. I'm not a nasty piece of work, though. I'm very nice.
I couldn't agree more. Amelia Cox is here with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12 is the time. Gabriel Gatehouse has joined me, author of The Coming Storm, but also, of course, maker of The Coming Storm, which started life as a podcast, migrated to Radio 4, and has become part of the political journalism furniture. It all sort of coalesces, Gabriel, to create the idea that you were probably one of the least surprised observers by recent events in America.
I was entirely unsurprised.
Yes.
And I had been saying for some time, this is not a kind of told you so kind of thing, because I wasn't saying Trump will win.
No.
Because who can guess these things? But the fact that he did win was, yes, entirely unsurprising to me, and there's kind of, in hindsight, there's sort of polling to back it up, right? In the run up to the election, there was a New York Times Siena College poll, and as we know, the polling was all wrong about who was going to win, and it was going to be so tight, and maybe Kamala Harris was going to, that was all nonsense. But there was some interesting and true stuff in that polling if you dug deep. So there was a question right down the bottom, which basically boiled down to the fact that around 60% of the electorate in America thought that the whole political and economic system was basically screwed and needed either major reform or tearing down entirely. And, who of those were going to vote for Kamala Harris? None of them. They were all going to vote for Donald Trump.
And into that space, all sorts of things can move.
Yes, all sorts of things, all sorts of people, and like Elon Musk.
Conspiracy. Yes, well, you were early on this, and what you do, perhaps uniquely, is draw lines and show links and speak of almost not a conspiracy of conspiracy theories, but a
sort of
conglomeration.
I mean, it's interesting when you start trying to kind of make connections between things as a kind of journalist or a documentary maker. If you're looking at things over a large span of time, that's what you do. You make connections, and in fact, that's also what conspiracy theorists do. So I found myself in this kind of quite weird position where I was examining conspiracy theories and how they were playing out and who was seeding them and why and to what end, but also being careful not to fall into a sort of conspiracy theory rabbit hole myself. And I kind of walk that tightrope a bit in the book quite consciously. But I think, we go back to the 90s, we look at the conspiracy theories that were seeded around the Clintons back then, and you can draw a sort of direct line between that and all the conspiracy theory madness that has surrounded the Trump presidency. And it's not like there was a bunch of guys who got together in a smoky back room in 1993 and thought, aha, if we seed some conspiracy theories about Bill Clinton, right now we're going to end up with a storming of the Capitol and Trump for a second term in the White House. But it is a sort of confluence of ideas and ideals that builds around this idea of a malign deep state, that the government is malign, malignant, a cabal, if you will, and that, really it needs to be torn down. And there are people who have been pushing this ideal of a much, much smaller state for a very long time.
Including Jacob Rees-Mogg's dad.
Yeah, William Rees-Mogg.
Now, I remember when people started sending me screenshots of The Sovereign Individual, written by Rees-Mogg Sr., who was a former editor of The Times, of course, like all stalwart anti-establishment figures.
An absolute pillar of the establishment.
Right? But how dare you suggest that Jacob is not a doughty rebel flying in the face of inherited wealth and privilege? But he wrote it with an American investor called James Dale Davidson. Now, oddly, when it first started appearing in my feeds, I dismissed it as nonsense. Not the book. The book exists, but the idea that it provided a blueprint for what was coming. Right. And that was a mistake.
Mystic Mogg, he was called in the...
Yeah, but as a Mickey take in Private Eye. Yes, exactly that.
Who's laughing now?
Yeah.
Not Private Eye, I suspect.
Because?
Because, what's this? So this book, The Sovereign Individual, written by William Rees-Mogg and James Dale Davidson in the mid-90s, which was a sort of prognostication about the transition to the digital age, that the nation state would fall apart, that computer technology, the internet would rob governments, democratic governments, of their ability to do what governments are supposed to do, which is provide the basic infrastructure of society. They predicted cryptocurrencies, they predicted artificial intelligence, they predicted the avalanche of, on social media, and people were laughing at them in the mid-90s, and they were absolutely bang on the money. But the thing about it was they weren't writing about this in a sort of, my God, this big thing's coming down the line, we better be careful, guys.
Yeah, be warned, guys. If we don't change course, this could happen.
They were writing about it like, yay, the nation state is going to fail, and in their words, sovereign individuals whose power will rival the power of the gods of Greek myth will be the new inheritors of societal structures. And they love it.
Which brings us to Peter Thiel and Elon Musk.
Right, who now have their man installed in the vice presidency, or will do on January the 20th, J.D. Vance, who is a protege of Peter Thiel. Elon Musk pushed for him. He had a long conversation with Donald Trump before he picked him as his vice presidential candidate. And Elon Musk is now going to be in charge of doing exactly what the writers of The Sovereign Individual dreamt of, which is radically reducing the power and scope of the state. Elon Musk is going to be, I think, in charge of the Department of Government Efficiency, which creates an acronym DOGE, which is also the name of his favoured cryptocurrency.
It is comical but sinister.
Comical but sinister. And so as Curtis Yarvin, who is he's this blogger, Mencius Moldbug, he's the sort of intellectual backbone of the new right, pointed out in a recent blog post, DOGE, the Doges of Venice were the leaders of Venice. And what did Curtis Yarvin like to point out? That the etymological root of that word Doge is the same as the word Duce, Il Duce. Just saying, he said, ha, 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 nudge, nudge, nod, nod, wink, wink to fascism.
Yeah. We know Trump's former chief of staff has not fought shy of the F word when it comes to describing what he experienced during the last administration.
Nobody's been fighting shy of the F word, including the Democrats, right? No. Which is possibly a big mistake.
That's why I felt entre nous, the British media should have concentrated much harder on his former allies calling him these things rather than on the Democrats calling
Quite
him these
right.
things.
Just entre nous and all the listeners of this show.
Well, no one listens to this rubbish, Gabriel. That's why we got you on. Just to add to that sense of momentum, that when the book that Rhys Mogstad wrote was reprinted in 2020, Peter Thiel wrote a foreword for it, wrote an actual preface for it. So what would this new order look like for an ordinary person? What I mean, if we do have these figures who are already emerging and will rival the gods of Greek myth when it comes to their power, and then Musk arguably as an individual is stronger than many nation states, particularly when you factor Starlink into the equation and some of the other.
Right.
How will the world change for normal people?
Well, look, I mean, they would argue. I heard you talking earlier about your excess of empathy.
It's a curse, Gabriel. Curse,
which I also try to engage my excess of empathy. So I'm trying to empathise with the Elon Musks and try to understand their argument.
Sure.
Which is that the current system isn't really working very well.
Yeah.
And they're right about that. Right. So they are kind of right to want to do something about it. The question is, what are they planning to do about it, and how is that going to work out? So I think the political background that the sovereign individual grows out of is one that is libertarian at one end and anarcho-capitalist at the other. Either way, they like small states or no state, and the freedom of the market to decide everything. The word you constantly hear when you ask people to describe what the world is going to be like under this new system, Darwinian.
Right.
Or Darwinistic, whatever the word is. Survival of the fittest. And a lot of these people think this is a good thing, both in terms of systems, which they think have become sclerotic, but also, I suspect, and this is where it starts getting a bit dark, in terms of people. I think a lot of these people believe in move fast and break things, slash and burn. You make things better. Creative destruction.
Yeah, and collateral damage. People who get lost along the way, people who fall.
I mean, and let us emphasise that people get lost along the way and the current system as well, right? So,
yes, they do. But I guess defenders of it would describe it as looking after the vulnerable rather than sacrificing them on the altar of acceleration.
Yeah, but I think that, just to think politically for a moment, I think what happened in this election, and kind of coming back to why Donald Trump was kind of in hindsight the obvious winner, is because the Trump camp, with its kind of burn it all down rhetoric, forced the Democrats, Kamala Harris, into a corner whereby they basically became the default defenders of the system. They became the people who were saying everything's fine and everything's not fine.
Isn't it? That was clever. Tactics, really. It was using the World Wrestling Federation tactics to box
kayfabe.
Yes, that's exactly. Last time I spoke to you, you said don't ignore the weird stuff. In fact, I think your first series of The Coming Storm, in many ways, sort of explored that theory to the nth degree. What's the weird stuff now? What's the weird stuff at the moment?
Well, this was the sort of catchphrase that me and Lucy Proctor came up with when we were kind of digging into all this weird QAnon thing. I mean, the interesting thing is that, of course, the MAGA supporters were preparing to challenge the results, right? Because they, like everyone else, thought it was going to be close. Maybe Kamala Harris might edge it. They were preparing to challenge it. And, of course, we haven't heard anything about questioning the results. Oddly enough, it's this amazing system that was completely broken worked amazingly well under a Democrat administration. But we have heard it, oddly enough, from some Kamala Harris supporters, right? We've heard an exact mirror image of a conspiracy theory. They're saying, well, look, Joe Biden won 81 million votes in 2020. We've only seen, I can't remember, we haven't even finished counting yet, but she's up to, Kamala Harris is up to something like 74, 75 million. Where are these missing? Oh no, I think she was up to 71 million last year. Anyway, where are these missing votes? Right, the Republicans have stolen it. So what happens is that you're seeing this mirror image. The difference, of course, is that no high-profile Democrats are saying this, right? Yeah. So we're not likely to see that catch on, and we're not likely to see court cases. But it is a question of how do you play the game when one side has completely changed the rules, which is that, this whole election integrity infrastructure that exists, that they didn't have to use this time because they won, they're not always going to win, right? And they will use it.
It's become negotiable. Well, reality has become negotiable.
Completely.
And I mean, for me, I don't know about you. If I had to pick a point, it would be when Kellyanne Conway said alternative facts. I think that would probably... I mean, I know a lot was already lost by then, but that was the first time that they said out loud.
It was the first time they said it out loud.
That
but
we now call lies.
It was already being...
Enacted.
And you know, the truth is not a fixed thing, right, James? The truth is your understanding of the world as you perceive it from all the facts that you can see around you. But if you move to another place, you will see different facts around you and you will interpret the world differently. So I see the truth not as a kind of immutable fixed thing, but as something, and again, coming back to this idea of empathy, if you do walk in somebody else's shoes for a bit, you will perceive a reality differently from if you stay in your own spot the whole time. So my kind of mine and Lucy's idea in The Coming Storm of don't ignore the weird stuff was take a conspiracy theory, not literally, because of course most of it's nonsense, but take it seriously because it is telling you something about society. It's telling you something real. So if millions of Americans believe that government has been taken over by a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles operating out of the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. that doesn't have a basement, then obviously that's not true. But it is telling you something about how people in a democratic society perceive their system.
It's about the ecosystem in which the crazy stuff can be believed.
Right.
Then what we need to understand the ecosystem.
Right. The crazy stuff is telling you
the weird
stuff. The weird stuff is telling you that something is wrong with the system. Yeah. Democracy is malfunctioning.
And that's numbers, though, Gabriel. A final point, because there's always a David Icke or someone in the back. There's always somebody, but it's when it gets fertilised and when it grows. That's when the
by
ecosystem.
Numbers. So the idea that the 2020 election was stolen, which is, nonsense. Has become, nevertheless, a political fact by virtue of the tens of millions of people who believe it. And this is why, by the way, I think, time will tell whether this is true, that a Trump victory, and a quite comprehensive Trump victory, might actually be the best chance American democracy has of surviving in its current form.
Yes, which I found myself saying out loud on the radio the other day and almost balked at the very back. So The Coming Storm by Gabriel Gatehouse, a journey into the heart of the conspiracy machine. Think of it as a Rosetta Stone for a lot of what has happened in recent years, and obviously most pertinently in recent months. Don't take my word for it. Louis Theroux describes a spellbinding storyteller and reader of the runes of the strange times we live in.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, Gabriel Gatehouse. and if you think that's bad, if you think the conversation we had in the first hour about climate change is bad, wait until you hear about the catastrophe facing the nation today, driving some corners of the country into states of absolute apoplexy. I'm talking about widespread shortages of something that the restaurant critic Jay Rayner devoted a whole section of his book Nights Out at Home to, and I'll tell you what it is, but you better make sure you're sitting down and have nurse near at hand. I'll tell you what the country is facing a catastrophic shortage of after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:51 is the time. Yesterday it was Cadbury's chocolate fingers in France, but I could live with that because it was only affecting the French. Today it's taramasalata. The aisles are empty. Jay Rayner is the restaurant critic at The Observer, broadcaster, jazz musician as well, you may not be aware of that, and devoted a whole section of his book Nights Out at Home to taramasalata. We think we know why there is a shortage, Jay. It's industrial action at a plant in Spalding, Lincolnshire, where the majority of the country's taramasalata is made. But I wanted to ask you, what are we going to do about it?
Well, thank you for inviting me onto the show at this difficult time for the nation. I'm here to provide whatever support I possibly can. It's kind of intriguing. We get used to seeing vast amounts of this stuff in deli, the deli shelves and in corner shops and so forth. And yet the main ingredient, which is smoked cod's roe, is not obviously available everywhere. So I presume it's all going to Spalding, which is a fine town that I've visited on occasion, very big in pumpkins. So if you were looking for a replacement, maybe pumpkins are the way to go.
Pumpkin dip.
A good pumpkin dip is a marvellous thing. So Yes, I did write about it. And what was interesting to me is the way that it went through various stages in Sheffield restaurants. Because we knew of taram salata as a dish that you would be served in Greek, brackets, mostly Greek Cypriot. They're almost all Greek Cypriot run in the UK, restaurants as part of a meze at the beginning of the meal. And if you're as old as I am, you can go back to the 70s, it would be bright pink and quite acidic. And then it was rediscovered by various chefs. I remember Launceston Place, I think 2008, where it turned up as a truffle dip, but then it was called whipped codsroe. And the whipped codsroe years went on for a very long time because they were trying to distinguish it from the stuff that you would get in, which was very nice, I have to say.
Smokier. It's smokier when it wasn't pink. It went from acidic to smoky, didn't it, in a way?
It did. I mean, I think what happened was they just towed off on one of the key ingredients, which is sources of acidity, which is usually lemon juice. Has to be said, the pinkness usually came from either beetroot or, in the old days, cochineal, right, which is an extract from brush beetle.
I used to love that fact. My dad used to tease me with that fact whenever we had pink fairy cake, so the icing would have indeed been made from the corpses of crushed beetles. Have you ever made it yourself? Taram salata, not cochineal.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got a recipe in the book. The key thing is to get hold of smoked codsroe.
So you need a good fishmonger. First, catch your fishmonger.
A fishmonger's a good place. I think it may be available online, and there may be, one of those classic middle-class supermarkets that stocks it. I'd go and have a look online there. And it's very straightforward. So you need approximately, and here is the issue, because it's about taste, 250 grams of smoked codsroe. This will make about enough for 4 as a dip, and 175 grams of creme fraiche. And you scrape out the roe from inside. It comes in a lozenge with a membrane. So you're scraping out the smoked roe, which is a deep orange rust colour. You put that into, a blitzer of some kind. I suggest doing it with 2/3 of the creme fraiche, adding some of the lemon juice. I suggest about 2 tablespoons, and keep tasting. Cracked black pepper. You whip it up, and that's really all it is.
You're making me hungry.
If you want it creamier, add some more creme fraiche. If you want it even creamier, don't make it creme fraiche, make it double cream. It can be done with water. There are other recipes you'll see with a little bit of vegetable oil in there.
This is public service broadcasting at its finest.
Isn't it?
Yes,
Isn't it?
It's filling a hole. Meeting a need. Finally, Jay, do we have any indication of... I mean, I've got 2 questions, really. Where is all the codsroe if it is not being transported into taram salata in Spalding? And secondly, do we have any idea of whether there is light at the end of the tunnel?
The latter, no. I think you better go and find a news reporter to answer that question for you. One of the great points about smoked codsroe is smoking is a form of preservation.
Yes.
So it's a way of preserving a product. So there will be absolutely no problem with whatever has happened.
A codsroe mountain, no less. A smoked codsroe mountain.
Building up, but it will be absolutely fine. It can keep for really significant amounts of time.
I need to do something on the Health Secretary's speech, so I'll have to wrap it almost now. But you hardly ever see it on restaurant menus in Greece herself.
Probably not in Greece, but you will inside.
But you would, right. Jay Rayner, always a pleasure. Jay Rayner's book, Nights Out at Home, one of his many, many books, is a Bible of these matters. Aggie Chambray is in Liverpool. She's been listening to Wes Streeting's speech. Over to you, Aggie.
I have indeed, James. Well, look, the government said over and over again since they got into power that there'll be no new money for the NHS without reform. But, as you remember, last month, they announced £22 billion for the NHS. So, today comes the reform. In I think it's fair to say, slightly bullish speech from the Health Secretary, one described afterwards to me as slightly tense, where Wes Streeting described the NHS as living on borrowed time. He announced that the NHS is going to carry out a no-holds-barred review of performance across England, and the results are going to be made public, effectively creating an Ofsted for the NHS.
Those ICBs and providers that are doing well will be rewarded with greater freedoms over how to spend their capital, with fewer ring fences, for example. Those that demonstrate the best financial management will get a greater share of capital allocation. We want to move to a system where freedom is the norm and central grip is the exception to challenge poor performance. So improving services for patients should be rewarded, and the quid pro quo is that there will be no more rewards for failure. The work you do couldn't be more serious. When you get it right, lives are saved. When you don't, the consequences can be tragic. If performance dips, I reserve the right to take those freedoms away. And for those judged to be persistently failing, we will act, going from zero consequences for failure to zero tolerance.
So zero tolerance there. He's essentially talking about the fact that they are going to grade people into 4 different bands, and the lowest of those bands, they are going to go in, they're going to do a thorough inspection, work out where the problem lies, and if it's the leadership, they're going to sack them. And Wes Streeting referring to people in those speeches, some very senior managers, as bad apples, but saying, look, it's not every manager. You know, I could be really popular with the public and go in and say I'm going to sack every manager. I'm not going to do that. We are going to kind of weed out the ones that we need to. The other kind of big thing that he announced today was saying there's going to be a clampdown on agency staff. They say that at the moment they spend £3 billion on agency staff and they want to cut down on that. But as I say, the reception afterwards has been slightly mixed, someone describing it as tense, and making sure, saying to Wes Streeting that he needs to make sure that he keeps it constructive rather than kind of undermining the confidence with the NHS, because he keeps referring to it as broken, and I think they have found that has hit morale in some hospitals.
Great stuff, Aggie. Thank you. And a lot for us to get our teeth into tomorrow, and no doubt colleagues later today. Aggie Chambray there, live from Liverpool, where, as you've heard, Wes Streeting has been laying out some of the, I mean, you know, love it or loathe it, certainly substantive plans that he has for the NHS. Something quite remarkable has happened. I don't know that this has ever happened to me before on the radio. Someone has actually solved the mystery that we were, someone knows exactly why there are Tara Masalata shortages up and down the country, and exactly who is to blame. It's nothing to do with industrial action in Spalding in Lincolnshire. Apparently it's all Meghan Markle's fault. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4 on LBC, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.